Hello aspirants, welcome to Target UPSC. Before starting this session, I would like to tell you, ये जो सेशन ऋषि सर ने लिया है बहुत धमाकेदार सेशन है अबाउट इंग्लिश कॉम्प्रिहेंशन एंड आपका एक भी क्वेश्चन गलत नहीं होगा इफ यू फॉलो हिज टेक्निक्स एंड टिप्स. ये एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट सेशन है. सेकेंडली फर्स्ट हाफ में उन्होंने इंग्लिश कॉम्प्रिहेंशन एंड उससे रिलेटेड टॉपिक्स के सारे कॉन्सेप्ट्स डिस्कस किए हैं. इफ यू वांट द नोट्स ऑफ कॉन्सेप्ट्स, techniques and tips which Rishi sir has given in this lecture, you can click on the link in the description box and you will get the most important notes with respect to CSAT जो आप 2 घंटे के बीच में पढ़ सकते हो. I would request everyone to please watch this session. ये मेरा रिक्वेस्ट है. One of the best session है and Rishi sir is expert with respect to English. अगर आपने ये सेशन पूरा ध्यान से फॉलो किया डेफिनेटली आपका CSAT क्लियर होगा, ये हमारी गारंटी है. एंश्योर कीजिए कि ये एंड तक सेशन देखिए and you will realize the quality of the content. Hope you watch this entire lecture and clear your CSAT examination. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to this video where we are going to look at CSAT English concepts and some question types and the tricks. Okay, so my name is Rishi and I'm here to guide you for the last mile prep that you require in next 15 days for your CSAT exam. So let's get into the agenda. So what are we going to see today is first I'm going to discuss what is this video about, then about me, like why would you listen to me, right? Who am I? So I'll tell you a little more about myself. Then we'll look at some concepts. I have gone through the past year question papers of last 10 years and I have figured out some of the concepts that are very much required. So we're going to discuss that. And then we are going to look at some of the question types. And lastly, I'm going to give you a pro tip. You are writing an exam, know how the examiner is going to set that exam. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek into the examiner's mindset. Okay, so let's get into it. So what is this video? This is the only video that you will require to go through all the concepts and the question types that you may require to crack the CSAT English exam. You don't have to go through the pain of looking at the previous year questions. So I have gone through it and I am giving you all the insights that you need to crack the entrance exam, right? One of the pro tip, watch till the very end, is because that's when I'm going to tell you how examiners are going to set their questions, right? All right. So why should you listen to me? So you know, I am someone who walks the talk. So I have been writing entrance exams in India for past couple of years. These are the scores, as you can see. I've been consistently scoring 99 percentile in CAT, CSAT, IFT, MBA, and various other entrance exams. So you can see that I know a little bit about how to crack entrance exam. So I guess I can help you in that regards at least. All right. So with that, a little bit of introduction about myself and what is this video about. Let's get cracking. So what is an argument? Okay. So always remember that anyone who is writing a piece of paragraph is not writing just for the sake of writing, right? A piece of paragraph is usually a form of expression. So what happens is sometimes author wants to convey some idea to their readers, right? And there is a typical way in which they write. And the most popular, or rather the only way that people write is, all right, so they will first give you the premise, okay? And then they will give you the conclusion. Okay, so this is how typically a paragraph or a passage is written, right? Now, what is a premise? Premise is basically anything that is either factual or incidental or some evidence that is presented to support the conclusion. So premise will always support the conclusion, right? If the premise are strong enough, your conclusion can be drawn in a very strong manner. If premise are not so good, chances are your conclusion will not be good. I'll give you a very funny and simple example, right? Suppose if I come and tell you, right, if I tell you Narendra Modi is the best Prime Minister of India, right? Now that's my conclusion, right? Now would you just agree to me if I say that? Chances are no. Suppose if I tell you I like Narendra Modi because I like his beard. Now that is a very weak reasoning, right? So the premise that I am giving is about his beard, right? So that doesn't make a good reason, right? So that is not a very strong link between a premise and a conclusion. On the other hand, if I tell you I like Prime Minister Modi because the way he is conducting the G20 summit is commendable. Now this is something that at least I can defend with the facts, with the evidence, with some of the anecdotes, some verbatims. I can produce something in order to kind of support my conclusion, right? So whatever is if you have a very strong link between your premise and the conclusion, your argument is strong. If it's a weak link, your argument is weak. And most of the time, or rather always, the link is the assumption, right? So this is the familiar word. You might have been solving some assumption questions. So I'll explain that in detail as well. But your premise, your conclusion, and something that is unwritten, which is an assumption, this whole is basically called as argument, right? Now, always remember, assumption will never be stated in the passage. So if you are going to solve a question where they are asking which of the following could be an assumption, chances are whatever is the answer is not written in the passage. So if there is any line that is given as it is from the passage as an option, that is not your assumption. Conclusion, on the other hand, will always be given in the passage, or can be kind of, you can reword it, paraphrase it. Premise will always be given in the passage. Assumption, by definition, is you assume something. That means you don't have to explicitly state it, right? I am recording this video in English. Did I explicitly say I'm going to do it? No, because I assume that you might know English or you might understand the English language, right? So that's how the assumption is. This is something at the back of my mind. This is not explicitly written in the argument. So let's look at some of the concepts in this. Okay, so logic is basically logical reasoning, is a typical topic that you come across when it comes to reading comprehension in CSAT. So logic is the science that evaluate our arguments. So that's the whole and soul of what we are going to do when we solve the comprehension questions. An argument, as I just discussed, it's a group of statement with one particular conclusion and many premises. A statement is a sentence. It can be true, it can be false. You know, it can be a judgment, it can be an inference, it can be an opinion, it can be anything. A premise, as I just mentioned, it's kind of a evidence, supporting detail, facts, anything that supports your conclusion. And conclusion is the main idea, or whatever that the author wants to convey, right? So let's look at one by one. So what is a conclusion? Now, conclusion is most probably a statement of opinion, a judgment, right? Suppose if I say Rishi is a good student versus Rishi is a student. Now, when I say Rishi is a student, that becomes a fact. That's a premise, right? When I say Rishi is a good student, that's my opinion, right? So usually your opinions will have a bias, something that author really wants you to kind of understand, or something that one idea that author wants to convey. So that usually is a judgment. So a pro tip, look for adjectives. Most of the time adjectives are used in order to identify an opinion of a person, right? So the information, facts, evidence, argument, that is statement of passage, are called the premises. Everything else, that is opinion and all, will be basically called conclusion. So please understand, premises can be many, conclusion will always be only one in a particular paragraph, right? Now, it must be logically derived from the given statements, not to mention, and at the same time, please understand, you are not allowed to use any knowledge outside of that passage in order to draw a conclusion, okay? So whatever is your conclusion has to be part of the passage and has to be drawn from what is given in the passage only, right? So let's see an example, okay? So suppose my example is, I have an exam tomorrow that I have been preparing for a long time, but I don't have any pen to write the exam. Then we can conclude that I will either buy or borrow a pen tomorrow, right? So we concluded that. It's not an inference, right? It's not even an assumption. It's a conclusion. You have a set of facts, a situation is given to you. Based on that, you are concluding that probably you will have to buy or borrow a pen tomorrow. Right? Now, again, a pro tip, if you come across words like hence, so, therefore, chances are they are the statements of conclusion, right? And always ask the question why till you get the answer. Okay, keep asking the question why. Why is the author saying that? Why is it that he is writing something like that? The moment you start asking why again and again and again, chances are you will land to a conclusion. So we'll look at some examples like that. Now, some of you might ask, sir, I understand now what is conclusion, but what is an inference, right? And inference are something that is most predominantly asked in your CSAT exam. So I'll tell you what is the difference between inference and conclusion. Okay, but let's just understand what is an inference first. So inference, just like conclusions, are derived using facts, evidence, observation, and we deduced it given the situation in the passage. But here we are allowed to use our prior knowledge. We are allowed to use a knowledge which is not given in the passage, something that is generalized in nature. So if you find out something that is true based on your knowledge as well as the what is given in the passage, if you combine these two, whatever you conclude is generally your inference. So what is a thin line between a conclusion and an inference? Conclusion is basically what that is given in the passage. That is what author wants you to convey. Inference is what actually conveyed by the reader. Now, what actually conveyed to the reader can as well be the conclusion given by the passage, or it can be the conclusion of the passage plus some my worldview or my notion of my knowledge of that particular topic. If I combine the two, that will be an inference. So please understand, conclusion is always from the author's point of view. Inference is always from the reader's point of view. So conclusion will be given by the author. Inferences will be drawn by the reader. Now, if the inference drawn by the reader and the conclusion drawn by the author, if there are overlapping, chances are that author has done a brilliant job in writing that piece of paragraph. If there is a mismatch, or rather you can infer a lot of more things than what is given in the passage, chances are there are some disconnect in what author wants to say versus what readers are getting inferred, right? So let's see an example. If a stray dog run towards you with his teeth out, growling and barking, then you would probably infer that the dog is about to attack you, right? Now you inferred that. How did you infer? Because you have seen such attacks before, or maybe you have experienced it before. I assume none of you have done that, but maybe you have seen that before, or you kind of experienced that before, right? So you used the situation plus your prior knowledge to come to an inference. So what is your inference? Oh, chances are he is going to attack me now. So that's your inference, right? So it could be your observation, as I said, or your past experience. It may or may not be true. Please understand. Conclusion has to be true 100% based on the passage. Inferences may or may not be true, right? Inferences can be, you can draw your inferences based on some stereotypes as well, right? So they cannot be validated as easily as the conclusions can be, right? So what is the difference between conclusion versus inference? So unlike conclusions that are logically derived, inference are more in nature of an educated guess. So as I said, conclusion, what is given in the passage; inference, what you understand of the passage plus your worldview around that topic, what is given in the passage. Combine the two, you get an inference. You just look at what author is trying to say, you get a conclusion, right? Now, so here is a little generalized example that I want to give you, okay? So suppose, let's look at this. So say there are three statements in a passage A, B, C, okay? Now A, B, C plus logic will give you conclusion, something that is already given by the author in the passage, right? Now if I only use A plus my logic, that is an inference, right? So I am using a piece of information from the passage. It may not be the full passage, just let's say the first sentence of the passage. I take that sentence, I apply my logic to it, my knowledge to it, my worldview to it. Whatever I get is an inference, right? Conclusion is what is given by the author. So it has to be combination of everything that is written in the passage. So that's the difference between a conclusion and an inference. So again, conclusion can only be one, inferences can be many. You can draw as many inferences, as many according to the statements that are given in the passage, right? Now ABC plus logic is equal to conclusions, and that may also lead to an inference, right? So both can be possible. You can just take one statement and draw an inference based on that, or you can take the whole passage and then draw a conclusion, and from that you can draw an inference. So anything is possible. So suppose X implies Y and Y implies Z, then that means X implies Z. So basically X implies Y and Y implies Z. That means what you can imply, you can say that X implies Z. So that is usually an inference, right? Right. So always understand an inference can never be a direct line from the given passage. Whenever you are solving an inference based question, please understand if there is any option that is the restatement of what is already given in the passage, chances are that is not your answer, right? Inferences is basically read between the lines. It's an old wisdom. You might have heard it from many people, read between the lines. That's exactly how you draw the inference. You read, but you also apply your own mind, your outside knowledge to that, and you get an inference, right? Right. So conclusion versus inference, we have understood that. We'll just see one real life example. India has fought many wars with Pakistan and China. There are frequent skirmishes and tensions even now on India's northern borders. The exact border line is often challenged by the parties involved. Lack of properly demarcated border is also an issue with the Bangladesh. Now that is the whole paragraph. It's an easy to read paragraph. I hope you understand what is written. Now what is the conclusion? Relations between India and Pakistan, India, China are probably not good, or India, Pakistan and India, China are enemies, at least on the military front. Now this I can definitely infer based on what is given in the passage, right? Or you can say this could be the next line that the author wants to write. Maybe that is the reason why he is discussing all of these things. Now what is an inference? Unclear borders may lead to unhealthy relationship with neighbors. Now you understand, your inferences are more generalized in nature, right? It may not be specific to the topic given, but it's just taking one particular statement regarding the unclear borders. If you see, the exact border line is often challenged by parties. It's just taking that line, and based on that, I am adding my own knowledge. Maybe I know that some other countries are also facing the same challenges when it comes to borders. So I am kind of drawing an inference based on one line. Understand, not the full paragraph, just one line from the paragraph and my own knowledge. Combine that and I get an inference. Conclusion, if you see, I have to use everything that is given in the paragraph. Then only I can draw a conclusion, right? So that's the difference. How do you differentiate whether the question is asking conclusion versus inference? So usually, which of the following statement can you infer from the passage? Which of the following statements can you conclude from the passage? So this is how they differentiate an inference based question versus a conclusion based question. But an inference question can also be considered as what inference can you draw from the line, from and whatever is the particular line. Again, as I said, inference can be drawn from a particular piece of statement. It doesn't have to be necessarily from the whole paragraph, right? So I guess this much knowledge is enough for you to understand what is the difference between conclusion and inference, at least on the basic level, at least on the foundational level, you know how to differentiate the two. One thing I forgot to mention, don't worry about this document. I'm going to share this document in the description, so you'll get the link. So you don't have to make notes or take screenshots. You will get this document, right? Now, there are some questions that I saw where they asked which of the following can be implied, rather which of the following can be inferred, right? So what is the difference between imply question versus an inference question? Okay, so to imply, it means that something is hinted or suggested by the author. It is not said directly, right? So author, you don't say anything, but you say a lot of things at the same time, right? It's kind of that you are implying something. Inference, you can deduce from the evidence or facts given in the passage, right? So to imply is more assertive, it has more active tone than drawing inference. When an author implies something, then he is giving you hidden or indirect hints, right? Something that author is not saying, but somewhere he is also saying that, right? Rather than stating something explicitly. While an inference is something you understand or deduce after you apply the logic to the given facts and evidence. You understand the inference by now, right? So an author implies and the reader infers. Again, implications or implies are from author's point of view. Inferences are from a reader's point of view. A person who implies is giving information, while a person who infers is receiving the information. I hope by now you understand. Okay, so what is an example? When his boss said that there are going to be some expenditure cuts in coming months, he just implied that some useless expenses will be reduced. However, Mac inferred that it is a sign of impending layoffs, right? So boss just came and made a statement that there could be some budget cuts in the coming few months. Now, what is it that boss implied? Boss may very well have employed with maybe noble intention that there is actually a budget cut, maybe some of the expenses will be reduced. What is it that an employee inferred? Or maybe my job is in danger. Maybe I am at a risk of a layoff, right? So that's the difference between what you imply versus what you infer, right? So I hope by now you understand what is inference, what is implication or imply, and what is the conclusion. Now let's look at the link that joins a premise and a conclusion, which is an assumption. Okay. Now again, assumption, as I said, it's not stated in the passage. So assumptions are something that we have already learned or experienced and do not question. So something that we already know or we assume. I assume you know something, so I don't necessarily feel it to be mentioned while doing a conversation, right? They may be a part of our beliefs, and we may interpret everything else assuming our beliefs to be true. So they are kind of prism through which we see the world around us. Same is true for an author who writes a RC passage. So again, it's preconceived notion, something that you know at the back of your mind, right? A leftist person will try to find economic causes for all the problems in the world, while a religious person may assume that everything happens due to the will of the God. Okay, so that is an assumption. You know how a leftist would assume versus you know how a religious person would assume. Okay, don't get me wrong here. Okay, this is just my understanding of how leftists think. So if there are any leftists, don't get offended. Okay. While we make conclusions and inferences based on facts, evidences, or observations, assumptions are things that we presume or presuppose and take for granted. Something that I don't think is needed to be explicitly mentioned. I am assuming something is true and I'm just moving on, right? So again, it's not definitely mentioned in the passage. Okay. So let's look at an example. If you see anyone sad, you can infer that person must be having problems in his life, right? You have inferred it using your observation by seeing the gloom on his face. However, if you think that he must be sad because of financial issue or relationship issues, then this is your assumption. So he is sad is your inference. He is sad because of financial condition is your assumption. Or he is sad maybe because some family issue. So that becomes your assumption. Okay. So probably because you have had been sad or depressed due to these reasons in the past, you believe that that person may also be sad for the same reason. So that's an assumption. Okay. So usually, as I said, assumption plus facts, or basically facts is basically premise. So your assumption plus premise is basically the conclusion of the author. So assumption is the base. It is the base for any critical message that author wants to give. Earlier, CSAT used to have some questions. Nowadays, they are not asking. But earlier, in case the questions get asked, something like which of the following would strengthen the argument, which of the following would weaken the argument, chances are you have to first identify the assumption, and whichever option strengthens your assumption, strengthens the argument. Whichever option weakens your assumption, weakens the argument. So you can understand how assumption is important in that regard, right? So sometimes the question will not mention the words conclusion, inference, or assumption explicitly, but you can sense them by the language of the question. Now, what is the language? Suppose if the statement abouts are true, which of the following statement must be true? Now, these are inference or conclusion questions. The above information supports which of the following assertions? Again, inference or a conclusion question. Select the belief system on which the argument provided in the passage depends. That is an assumption, right? What is the foundation of that passage, or what is the base of that passage? Those kind of questions will most probably be your assumptions. Okay. Now another question that we usually see is critical message or crux of the passage kind of a question. So let's just understand. Now what is crux? Crux of the passage is the main idea that author is trying to convey, right? Why is he writing something that he is writing? What is it that compelled him to write? Right? Nobody writes for the sake of writing. They want to convey some idea to the reader, right? So that usually is crux of the passage. Most of the time that is given in the passage. Sometimes that is not given in the passage. So you will have to kind of understand where to draw the line. So it is the most critical or the most crucial message that author is trying to convey, right? Now, as per the dictionary, not as per the me, as per the dictionary, the crux is the most important or a difficult part of a problem, something that you need your most focus on. That is usually the crux, the core of the message, right? So while to draw a conclusion, we all use the information provided in the passage. To find the critical message, we ignore all the minor points and focus only on the most significant point, right? So sometimes one of the key ways in identify how to find the crux of the passage, you kind of ignore the premises and focus on conclusion. Anything that is opinionated or a judgment based statement that is given in the passage, chances are if you just kind of keep those in mind and based on that if you come up with some particular crux of the passage, that would most probably be true. If there are some evidence, some data points, some witnesses, or some piece of information that supports your conclusion, that generally will not help you find what is the crux of the passage. That generally is just the details to support the crux of the passage. So if you want, again, a pro tip, if you find the crux of the passage, look for the statements of judgments, look for adjectives, something that author wants to conclude, right? Those will most probably form the crux of the passage, right? So what is the difference between conclusion and crux of the passage? As I said, conclusion, it has to consider the premise, the assumption, and linking the two will give you a conclusion. You take the opinionated statement from the passages, you just kind of process that, and chances are you will get crux of the passage. There is a fine line between conclusion and crux, and I'm not really sure that there have been passages where they ask either of the two. Either the questions are conclusion based questions or the questions are crux of the message, crux of the passage type of a question. So chances are, if you most of the time you use the same technique to solve both the questions, and chances are you will get the right answer. Okay. So implication we already discussed. So this is just an extra piece of information for implications. I'll give you this information in the form of PDF, right? And again, a rarely used question, corollary based question, right? So what is a corollary? Corollary is basically what is the immediate consequence of something, right? So in math, it is used very extensively, right? Is used most formally to describe a new proof or proposition that follows naturally from the established one. So you know something, or passage has given you some conclusion, or maybe some incidents that passage has given you. What is it that can immediately follow after that? All right. So suppose maybe there is an attack on the convoy, for example, in some area in India. What is the immediate consequence? The corollary of that is chances are an army will be deployed, or maybe the police force will be deployed, right? So that is the natural consequence of something. So that usually is called the corollary. Now, I'll give you one example, okay? Global trade negotiations are now eyeing the digital area in an attempt to preemptively colonize it. Big data is freely collected or mined from developing countries like India and converted into digital intelligence in developed countries. So this is a passage that is warning basically that look how data is getting collected and how developed countries are using it. Now, what would be the corollary of that? So the corollary of that would be India should be careful to protect his digital sovereignty in global trade talks. So basically now India, so this was a warning, right? This was a warning, and this is a next step of action that becomes a corollary. So in a layman term, corollary is something that you will immediately do once you know what is given in the passage. So you get that piece of information. What is it that you would do right after that? That usually is corollary, right? Now, let's come to the last bit of this video. I told you the pro tip, the examiner mindset. But before that, I hope by now you have understood the different types of the questions and the concepts behind those questions. Go through this PDF once again and maybe kind of understand these concepts and nuances in that. Maybe rewatch this video if you haven't understood anything, and chances are you will be good. There is another video which will be a little longer one where I'm going to solve only questions. So I'm going to solve so many questions in that. If you just watch that video, and I'm going to use the same concepts that I used in this video. So if you just watch that video, chances are you will be good for your CSAT exam. Okay. Now a pro tip, right? So understand what is the skill of solving. See, say there's something reading, you have to read and then you have to solve. That is typically what is involved in the English question, right? Now reading, I'm not really worried about, because now is not the time to discuss reading. We only have 15 days left, right? So now is not the time I tell you how to read and all, because that may require some time. And chances are you by now have practiced enough about reading, right? What I'm going to focus on is what is the solving part of it, right? So imagine if I ask you to create a question of CSAT English. What is it that you will do, right? Or assume what is the question setter will do. First, he will take a passage, right? Okay, he is writing a piece of blog, let's say. He liked that blog, he took out 2 paragraphs out of it, and now he decides that, okay, this is the paragraph I want to ask in CSAT. Now, what is it that he would do? He will first create a question, right? Now, that is not that relevant a skill for us, okay? We don't really need to worry about what questions is going to be asked, okay? Then what will he do? He will work a correct answer, right? Because chances are he knows what the answer is, right? So, he will first create that option. Now, that comes under art of reading, okay? That comes under art of reading. So I leave it to you to read the passage, and chances are you would know what is true as per the passage. So whatever is true, 100% true based on the passage, chances are that will be your correct answer, right? Now something that he does, and which is the most crucial thing, is then he creates the incorrect answers, right? And that, my friend, is what I am talking about, the skill of solving, right? Knowing how the incorrect questions are formed. Okay. So I'll give you a little bit of sneak peek into how a question setter would set that. Okay. Now, he has created a question. Whatever is your answer has to be true based on your passage. So your answer is definitely true based on the passage. Then there is something which is false as per the passage, right? Now that is definitely not an answer, right? So that you can understand. You have read the passage, you have understood it, you know what is not given in the passage or what is not said in the passage. So figuring out what is true as per the passage and figuring out what is the false as per the passage, that is fine. But so this is the band, for example, this is the leftmost part is something that is true, the rightmost part is something that is false. You can identify this, you can identify this. What you, all of you or most of you would be struggling is what is there in the middle, right? Something is true, a little bit true, you feel, oh, this is partially true, you're unsure as to whether you mark or not, or something like that. These are the uncertain options, right? Now, these uncertain options are what create problem for us, right? So suppose your answer is somewhere here, right? Now this is almost true, but you feel something is not right in that. So this is partially true, right? Now please understand, whatever is partially true is partially false, and whatever is partially false is completely false. Okay, so your answer has to be only here. Rest all this part is basically incorrect answer. Okay, whatever is your answer, it has to be here and only here and not anywhere else, right? And your anything else is your incorrect answer. Now, why am I telling you this? Now that forms the strategy. When it comes to English questions in CSAT, don't try to find the right answer. Rather, try and eliminate the wrong answers, because probability of finding the wrong answer is very high rather than finding the right answer. So the moment you find a little bit of fault, even a one word that makes it partially incorrect, chances are it is completely incorrect, right? So that's how you create. That's how you look at the correct answer versus incorrect answer, and focus more on the option elimination rather than choosing. We don't do that in maths. Okay, maths we solve and we hunt for the correct answer. Exactly opposite of that you do in English. You read, you understand, Now you find the faults in the option. So your by default response to an option is this option is incorrect. Unless you are completely convinced from that option that no, there is no fault in it, then only you change your conviction to correct. Okay. Now, how do these uncertain questions are formed? These uncertain questions are formed with a technique called BANE. Okay. So I'll give you a very small example. Suppose there is a passage that, let's say, talks about Mumbai. Okay. Mumbai in general, Mumbai life or something like that. Okay. Now, if an option is broad in nature, what is broad? Let's say passage is talking about Mumbai, the option is talking about Maharashtra. So your scope of the passage has been broadened. Now, Maharashtra might have been mentioned somewhere in the passage, okay, but it's not the main idea, or it's not the right answer most probably, right? So that's how you find the broad answer. You take the scope of the passage and you broaden it. That's how you figure out, that's how you create an incorrect answer. What is the other way you create an incorrect answer? Alien. Now, what is alien? Now, the passage is talking about Mumbai, the option is talking about Delhi. Now, Delhi might have been mentioned in the passage somewhere, but maybe it's just one of the supporting details or something like that, right? So, alien option is something that is not mentioned in the passage, or something that passage is not about. So that's how they question setter create incorrect option. They introduce an alien object in the option choice. Then narrow. Now, what is narrow? Suppose the option is the passage is talking about Mumbai, the option is talking about, let's say, Andheri, which is one of the areas in Mumbai, right? So that is like narrowing the scope of the argument. Your passage is talking about Mumbai, you're talking about one narrow thing that is mentioned in the passage. So that's how they create the narrow option. And last, extreme. Now these are always a little easier to find. What is an extreme option? Extreme option is, suppose passage says that how Mumbai weather is better than other metro cities in India, right? So it's just saying that is the whole crux of the passage. Okay, the option is saying Mumbai weather is best in India. Now you understand how it is taking it to the extreme. My author has only said that how it is better than others, versus the option is saying how it is best, right? Now that is usually extreme. Now you understand how they create extreme options. You know, extreme options will have extreme words. So words like never, always, only, best, worst, right? Longest, shortest, something like that. Something, these kind of words would most probably will not make up your answer. Not always, but most probably will not make up your answer. Okay. So these are some of the ways in which how question setter sets the incorrect option. So by now, I hope you might have understood what is it that is required to solve English CSAT English questions, and I have given you a small sneak peek into how question setter sets a question. Okay, so tune in for the next video where I am going to solve at least quite a few. I'm going to solve quite a few questions of English, and we'll cover all these concepts there. So thank you so much. Please do like, subscribe, and share this video, and we'll meet you in the next video. Thank you. So hi guys, welcome back. In this video, as the title suggests, this is the last mile prep. So this is going to be a long video where what I'm going to do is I have a set of questions that I feel if you just go through, chances are you will perform well in your CSAT. So again, this is the only practice that you need. Mind you, this is the only practice that you need. I'm going to solve in front of you. You just watch me solve. Whenever I ask you to pause the video, you pause the video, you solve yourself, play the video and see how I solve it. Doing that will help you understand where is the gap in you solving the question versus I am solving the question, right? So this is the only video that you will require. I have somewhere about 150 questions in this. So let's see how long we can hold this off. So without further ado, let's start. Okay, so let's go to the first question. I hope the screen is visible. Let's look at it. It says digital communication has created an unprecedented social reality in which children can be approached without the knowledge of the adults who look after them. Okay, So digital communication has created social reality where children can be approached without the knowledge of the adults who look after them. That means what? Any third party can come interact with the children, right? That's what basically we are saying. The sight of children playing on the street or in park like spaces had already become a rarity as sexual crimes became more common. As children receded from public view, they became subject to oppression through the so-called social media. Their exposure to violent videos, pornography, and terrorizing messages in common SHS is common. Tech giants remove millions of such material as part of their content moderation exercise. It is a strange ritual for these very companies actively encourage children to participate in digital activity. So again, author has given two, three things here. One, he's basically saying how children can be approached without the knowledge of their parents. At the same time, how these companies are on one hand talk about removing the explicit content from their portals, but at the same time they encourage students or children to use digital mediums as much as possible, right? So let's look at the question. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. So this is an assumption question. So let's look at that. Children in public spaces are susceptible to sexual crimes. I guess we can assume this because if this is the assumption, that's when this statement becomes true, that as the children in park has become a rarity as sexual crimes became more common. So in a way, author is trying to say because the sexual crimes are become more common, people or children are going less to the parks or public places, right? So A, definitely I can infer. What about B or 2? Sexual crimes have receded in public spaces because of them being shifted online. Now this receded, I'm not really sure of. Okay, I know because of sexual crimes occurring on the public places, children have stopped going there. But does that mean because children have stopped going there, the sexual activities have decreased? Nothing like that has been mentioned in the passage. So 2 I definitely cannot infer. So my answer has to be A, 1 only. Okay. All right. Let's move to the next one. Okay. Let me just zoom it. Okay. So just pause the video, you solve it, and then I will solve it. Okay. So I hope you have solved it by now. Okay. All right. The stress caused by the pandemic has been sustained over a long period of time and can be categorized as chronic stress. Chronic stress has been found to kill brain cells and even reduce the size of the brain. Chronic stress has a shrinking effect on the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for memory and learning. So basically, COVID causing chronic stress, chronic stress causing loss of memory and learning. Okay, so that's the author's reasoning. Studies in behavioral science show that we don't tend to make good decisions under stress. They have repeatedly shown that we often don't make good decisions even in normal times. Okay, for example, we know exercising is good for our health, but we don't do it enough. I guess this is applicable to me. We know overeating is bad for us, but we will indulge in it often. We know binging on social media takes away time from doing what we are supposed to be doing, but we can't stop scrolling. So basically, understand what author is saying. First, author is saying how COVID has impacted the chronic stress, how chronic stress impacts the learning and the memory, then how stress impacts decision making processes. Then author says, let alone under the stress, even in normal time people cannot take decision. And then it goes on to say how in even in normal time people don't take decision. It's like people know how exercise is good, they are not doing it. People know how bad social media is, but they keep scrolling it, and so on and so forth. So which of the following statements best reflects the crux of the passage? People have stopped outdoor activities fearing the pandemic. No, that is not the crux of the passage. If that was the crux of the passage would more talk about what is it that people are doing post pandemic, right? So, A gone. Memory and learning suffer due to chronic stress.
Yes, C is missing here. Okay. Now again, that is not the main purpose of the passage, right? That is just one supporting detail, maybe the first half of the paragraph, right? The virus has affected the prefrontal cortex, leading to the reduction in size of the brain. Now this is a distortion. The virus has not affected. The pandemic and the maybe the lockdowns and the isolation that has caused the stress, which in turn has caused the loss of memory or prefrontal cortex issues, right? So COVID is not responsible for that, like directly it's not responsible for that. So C gone. So I hope D is the answer, but let's look at it. The pandemic has made it more difficult for people to think rationally and take correct decisions. I guess this is what we can definitely infer. Author has kind of hinted that even in normal times we can't take decision because of COVID. We are already in stress, and stress also kind of makes the decision making worse, right? So in all decision making process, or in, you can say, thinking rationally, which is kind of a proxy to decision making process, that has been affected. So I guess I can definitely infer that. That becomes my crux of the passage. Okay, let's go to the next question. Give it a try and pause the video and let me know what's your answer. Okay, so I guess by now you must have done it. Let's look at the passage. Atmospheric ozone has two effects on the temperature balance of the earth. It absorbs solar ultraviolet radiation, which heats the stratosphere. Okay, it also absorbs infrared radiation emitted by the earth's surface, effectively trapping heat in the troposphere. Therefore, the climate impact of changes in ozone concentration varies with the altitude at which these ozone changes occur. So basically, author is discussing how ozone is important and how the depletion of that is kind of affecting. So I guess that's what I'm assuming. The major ozone losses that have been observed in the lower stratosphere due to the human produced chlorine and bromine containing gases have a cooling effect on the earth's surface. Okay, on the other hand, ozone increases the estimated to have has estimated to have occurred in the troposphere because ozone losses, I guess. Ozone increases are estimated to have occurred in the troposphere because surface pollution gases have a warming effect on the Earth's surface, thereby contributing to the greenhouse effect. So basically, we are discussing how ozone depletion is affecting, and we are discussing in which layer. So we discussed about stratosphere here. Where was that? Okay, lower stratosphere, and then we are discussing about the troposphere. So how is ozone layer getting depleted and how it is affecting greenhouse effect basically. Now, which of the following is true or the most rational and logical inference that can be drawn? Okay, so it's an inference question. Climate impact of ozone changes is majorly seen in troposphere. No, we are discussing about stratosphere as well, right? So it's only is majorly seen. Majorly, that means what? In other cases, it's not majorly seen. We don't know that. We cannot infer that. From the passage, at least I know stratosphere and troposphere are majorly the affected zones of climate impact for ozone. So one doesn't make sense. Stratospheric and tropospheric ozone losses affect the temperature balance of the earth. I guess that you can definitely infer. That's how the greenhouse effect is. So basically you understood the what is given in the passage, plus you add your own understanding of the outside world or the worldview of the ozone layer depletion cause. You combine the two and you basically can infer this particular statement, right? So answer is B, 2 only. Let's go to the next question. Just pause the video, okay, and give it a try. All right, let's look at it. A good foreign policy must work for you all. Your everyday needs from the world must be better met. And since we are a collective as a country, our national security must be assured. Okay. As that is done, the pursuit of our aspirations must be facilitated. The foreign policy being the link to the outside, it should enable us to draw what we seek. So we are talking about why foreign policy is important, basically. This could be in terms of technology or capital, best practices, or even work opportunities. And obviously, we would all like to be strong, we would like to look good, and we would like to feel appreciated. Any policy which ensures that all these goals has a lot going for it, it does not necessarily have to sound nice, it must simply pass the smell test. So it's like it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good enough. And what is good enough? If it is doing all of this, right? It makes us feel good, it makes us feel appreciated, it has to pass the smell test. What is a smell test? It's basically whether it's good or not. That's how you test. I mean, you smell and you understand whether it is good or bad. You don't say whether how good it is, or rather whether it is a best or not. That's not what you do in a smell test. It's just, is it good enough? Can I use it? Yes. Done. Right? Which of the following best describes a good foreign policy according to the author? The one which makes a nation and its citizens independent. Okay, a policy that gives us better work opportunities. That's again one. That one that strives to fulfill our usual demands from the world. A policy that connects us to the world better. Now, if you see A, B, and D, they are specific in nature. Makes us nations and citizens independent. That is the first part. A policy that get us better work opportunities. That is again, or even work opportunities. Again, one small part. That connects us to the world better. Okay, enable us to draw what we seek, right? And this could be in terms of technology or capital or best practices or something like that, right? So again, if you look at D, that connects us to the world better, is one specific detail as to how foreign policy should be. But if you look at C, C says the one that strives to fulfill our usual demands from the world. That means what? What now? This usual demands is what? Then it will include everything. We need technology, we need appreciation, we want to feel good, blah 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 blah. So basically, everything has to be fulfilled by foreign policy. So this option encompasses all the demands into one. So C makes the better answer choice. A, B, and D in that sense are narrow. They talk about only one aspect of a good foreign policy. C talks about in general how a good foreign policy should look like. Okay, so that's my answer. Let's go to next. Pause the video and give it a try. Okay. Especially in the last century, most Western countries have experienced significant demographic changes with a continuing increase in the number of older people who face medical and functional challenges, as well as diseases that are age-specific but have often originated in people's younger years. So it's a long sentence. Let's read it again. Let me just erase this. It says, especially in the last century, most Western countries have experienced significant demographic changes with a continuing increase in the number of older people who face medical and functional challenges, as well as diseases that are age specific but have originated in the people's younger years. So basically, we are talking about how the demography is changing, and it is changing for not good. Basically, your old age population is increasing, they are grappled with diseases, they face medical and functional challenges, and some of the diseases that they face are not this era's diseases per se. These are the diseases that they developed when they were young, right? Most of these diseases, including obesity, cardiovascular, heart diseases, or type 2 diabetes mellitus, are caused by civilization. Most NCDs primarily result from unhealthy lifestyle, including the consumption of too much or unhealthy food, too much alcohol, and excessive smoking habits combined with physical inactivity. More specifically, inactivity and healthy eating habits are associated with weight gain. Overweight and obesity are the major underlying causes of modern diseases such as CSD or type 2 diabetes mellitus. Okay, which one of the following statements best reflects the practical implication of the passage? So this is a passage that talks about which of the following is implied. Okay, prevention of NCDs can be done through physical activity and making healthy food choices. So I guess if you see this particular paragraph is more about or warning sign, or rather maybe a situation analysis with a bit of a caution, right? That's what this passage has done. what is it that people are doing, and what is it that they should stop. They should stop eating unhealthy food, too much food, and something like so. That's the caution. Now, what is the implication of that? What is it that you will do once you know all of this? I guess prevention of NCDs can be done through physical activity and making healthy food choices. So this could be one of the things that I can see. Indians should learn from Western countries about the importance of physical activity for good health. Should learn from Western countries. Alien, not at all discussed. Due to physical inactivity, any kind of non-communicable diseases can be developed at any age of life. Now, we are not discussing at any age of life. Rather, except the first sentence, nowhere the age is mentioned. We are just discussing habits. Now, when you are sure that age is not mentioned, what does that tell you? It's basically age agnostic. Whatever habits that we are talking about, these are not of a particular age, but in general. So C doesn't make sense. Unhealthy food, alcohol, and smoking causes CSD or type 2 diabetes. So this is not implication. This is just one of the supporting details or one of the inference that you can draw. So again, this doesn't make sense. A is your answer in that case. Okay. Let's move to next one. Let me just. Okay. So pause the video, give it a try. Now let's solve. Scholars on disaster management conceptualize recovery as action taken to rebuild lives once the hazardous situation has passed. However, this has been commonly interpreted as providing food, water, and medicines. So, scholars on disaster management conceptualize recovery as an action taken to rebuild lives, right? And however, this has been commonly interpreted as providing food, water, and medicine. So basically, what they are trying to do is rebuild the lives. What people understand they are doing is they are providing food, water, medicines, and all. Even in instances where states have moved beyond this, long-term recovery measures have largely focused on addressing physical vulnerabilities such as the provision of shelter. While these interventions are crucial, long-term recovery needs much more, but it is tricky because everyday vulnerabilities stemming from poverty are accentuated by recurring hazards. So basically what you are doing is not enough. You need something more or something better, right? What is the crucial message conveyed by the above passage? So what is the message conveyed by the above passage? State governments need to invest more in post-disaster recovery, focusing on the long-term measures. Need to invest more in post-disaster recovery, focusing on long-term measures. So this could be true, but let me keep it aside. Let's look at the other options. Loss of shelter due to disasters is the most critical hindrance in long-term recovery. Loss of shelter due to disaster is the most critical hindrance. No, we are not discussing that it is the most critical hindrance. We are basically saying shelter is one of the needs that you need after the recovery, during recovery. Further studies are required for giving solutions to long-term recovery from the disasters. Studies are required. I guess that is not the crux of the passage. It's more about studies is one specific part. What is it that you want to do? Maybe something at the policy level. What is it that you want to do? Long-term recovery from disasters is difficult without the resolution of poverty. So I guess I'm confused between A and D. So let's look at A and D again. What is the crucial message conveyed by the above? Okay. State governments need to invest more in post-disaster recovery, focusing on long-term measures. Long-term recovery from disaster is difficult without the resolution of poverty. I guess I am little inclined towards D because poverty is something that author has mentioned is the biggest hindrance. Now that is according to the author, right? Author feels that that is one of the biggest hindrance. So that has to be there when I say a crucial message or crux of the passage, right? A kind of misses that point. Although A is true, but it misses that point that you have to kind of invest more, but where exactly you want to invest, that it doesn't talk about, right? That is being talked about here in terms of poverty. So I guess A I will not mark, D is something that I will mark. Okay. Then let's go to next question. All right, give it a try. Pause the video, solve it. All right. Robots increasingly operate among people and they now work alongside us in factories and warehouses, share our streets and sidewalks. Who? Robots. Okay. Clean our homes and care for the most vulnerable among us. These emerging social contexts add new requirements to the knowledge that successful roboticists need. Many roboticists learn the basics of human machine interaction and usability. Far fewer learn foundational concepts from cognitive science on decision making by human agents, human navigation, and wayfinding, human communication, and human interpretation of intentional behavior that could be used to help robots interpret human actions. What is author trying to say? Robots are becoming mainstream nowadays. Most of the roboticists are focused on robot human interaction. Author is trying to say robot should more, or rather roboticists should focus more on humans first, how they behave, what decisions they take, what are their actions. So robot should be able to understand that rather than focusing on robot human interaction. That's what author is saying. All autonomous systems may have ethical impacts and all should be designed to avoid unethical outcomes. Designers bear some responsibility for their designs, even in a world where the autonomous systems they design eventually design other autonomous systems. So basically, autonomy is what author is trying to say. The autonomous system may have ethical impacts and all should be designed to avoid unethical outcomes. Basically, autonomous should not be doing any unethical means, right? Designers bear some responsibility for their designs, even in a world where the autonomous systems they design eventually design other autonomous systems. So it's basically self-learning robots. It's like a robot is put into a situation. Let's say robot did some mistake in that situation, then the robot would automatically learn how to behave in a similar situation next time. So you don't need a human sitting and coding for that. It's an autonomous, it will learn by itself, right? But author is trying to say, even if it is going to learn by itself, that learning program has to be designed by a designer, right? So that designer has to be ethical. That's what author is trying to say. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. There is a need for more learning in robotics regarding the interpretation of human actions. There is a need for more learning in robotics regarding the interpretation of human action. This is definitely true. That's what author is trying to say. He said that focus on interaction is very high. Now let's focus on human behavior, human action, right? There should not be any confusion that ethical outcomes should be one of the priorities of the designers of autonomous system. That is also he mentioned. He said it is the responsibility of the designer to kind of be ethical in creating the autonomous robots, right? So 1 and 2 both can be followed. So C becomes my answer. Let's go to next one. Okay, this one is a bigger one. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Pause the video, solve it. All right. Education is a valuable tool for gaining learning and wisdom. Okay. Though books are essential to education, the notion encompasses more than just books and bookish knowledge. It isn't required for education to be only based on books. The most important goal of education is to help people with how to read and write. Okay. So basically, the most important goal of education is how to read and write, right? It isn't required for education to be only based on books. Okay. The first step towards literacy is reading and writing. Education provides a person with endless opportunities for growth and advancement. People who have had an education tend to be calmer and more self-assured. People who have been educated are disciplined and understand the importance of time. Education allows a person to be more expressive and opinionated. He is able to readily communicate his viewpoints, which are supported by a clear aim and rationale. Education benefits not just the individual but also the community. The most important aspect of education is that it goes from one individual to another, then throughout society and eventually throughout the country. An educated individual tries to teach and inspire everyone with whom he or she comes into contact. Education brings one up to the speed on technological advancement as well. A well-educated person can easily adjust to technological developments. Education, more than anything else, is a source of hope, the desire for better life, the desire for a wealthy and a poverty-free existence. Okay. Now you see, author is kind of in love with the education. He just gave one idea. Education is a valuable tool for gaining and learning wisdom. Then few sentences he kind of showcased the advantage of education for an individual. Then from individual, he focused on society, how one educated helps the other, and that's how the whole society benefits, and that's how the whole country benefits. And then he goes on to say technological advancements, more than anything else, is a source of hope. Now it's becoming more general. It's a source of hope. It's the better life, desire for a wealthy, poverty-free existence. So you can see the praises are falling like here and there by the author for education, right? Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. The sole goal of education is to ensure everyone can read a book. Is that the sole goal of the education? That's not the sole goal of the education. Author is saying that's the basic goal of the education. That necessarily has to be done, which is to say literacy. But that's not the only goal of the education. The education goal is far beyond that. Right? Author has discussed that in detail. The benefits of education do not remain limited to one person alone. That is true. He says that from one person it transfers to another person, then to society, and then to country. So B, Bombay is my answer in this case. All right. So this seems to be a bigger one as well. Let me pause the video, give it a try. All right. Interdependence theory developed as a critique of realist theory in the 1970s. It challenged the realist idea that the state was the most important entity in international relations. Okay. It challenged the realist idea that the state was the most important entity in international relations. Which theory? Interdependence theory. Okay. Interdependence theorists stress the importance of non-state actors such as multinational corporations and their influential role in a more complex global society in which military power had become far less important or virtually irrelevant to shaping relations between countries. Okay. Liberal institutionalist and interdependence approaches overlap to a considerable extent. Which one? Liberal institutionalist and interdependence approaches. Okay. So now we discussed how interdependence theory is challenging the realist theory. What is a realist theory? State is supreme and everything else is secondary. Then we know what is that interdependence theorists say. They say the importance of non-state actors, multinational corporations, their role in the complex society, military power, between how military power between the countries becomes irrelevant when you have non-state institutions also have a say in, let's say, policy making or so, right? Then it says liberal institutionalist and interdependence theory. They both kind of overlap. So I can expect that now he will talk about that overlap. Both have a much more optimistic view of human nature and share the view that growing interdependence will strengthen the institutions of regional cooperation and open up greater opportunities for strengthening the United Nations and developing mechanisms of world governance. It is certainly possible for the liberal institutionalist to point to the fact that the overwhelming majority of transactions between states are peaceful in accordance with international law and to the mutual benefit of the states involved. The creation and development of the European Union can be seen from the liberal perspective as a powerful riposte to those who believe the international politics is based on nothing more than a constant pursuit of power after power, and that is always must be a zero-sum game. So zero-sum game is a classic game theory example. Okay, but even if you don't know that, it's fine. I guess the rest of the passage is basically trying to say how these liberal institutionalist and interdependence theorists are kind of overlapping, and how this is in a way better than, let's say, the realist approach. That's what the author is trying to say. With respect to the above passage, consider the following statements. Which of the following statements given are correct? So basically, I have to figure out which one is correct. There is a complete overlap of liberal institutionalist and interdependence approach. There is no complete overlap. There is an overlap to to quite quite high an extent, but there is no complete overlap. Okay, you can see that here. Okay, let me just erase this. You can see that here both have a approaches overlap to a considerable extent. That doesn't mean that they extend completely. So this doesn't make sense. Interdependence theorists are critical of multinational corporations. They are not critical. It's rather the opposite. They want multinational corporations to be part of the policy making apart from the state. Basically, power should not be confined to the states, and multinational corporations or some other institutes should also have a say. So, are critical of multiple national? No, they are not critical. So one gone, two gone. They both should not be part of my answer. So I guess three only. But let's check. Regional cooperation will strengthen the world governance mechanisms. I guess that's what is mentioned. He gave the example of European Union also for the same reason, I guess. So that makes sense. This is your answer. Okay. Let's move to next one. Okay. Pause the video and give it a try. All right. Meaningful politics, especially in democracies, is rooted in local organization, discussion, and negotiation. However, the structure of social media has facilitated a perception of engagement without organization and action without consequence. So basically, old versus new age, social media, how that has made uh, uh, has facilitated perception of engagement without organization. Like you feel you are engaged, but you're not physically organized, right? You feel, I mean, action without consequences. You can go ahead and post anything you want without any consequences. This wasn't and isn't inevitable. There are more thoughtful ways to structure platforms which would help connect and root people in their own communities instead of isolating them locally while connecting them virtually. So the author is kind of critical of social media and he's saying there are better ways of connecting through the same platform, by the way, right? With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Okay, social media has disturbed meaningful politics. I guess we can infer that because author is trying to say you are kind of, you were organized before, but now you are not. Okay, so kind of I can infer that, but let's look at the other one. Physical organization is the best way for any meaningful discussion. Author is not saying that this is the best way. Again, this is kind of extreme. Best. He's not saying this is the best. He is simply saying earlier this is what used to happen. Now this is what is happening. And he is more critical of what is happening now. Doesn't mean that he thinks the previous setup was best. That is not discussed. But definitely what is discussed is current setup has some areas of improvement. So two definitely is not there. Okay, let's talk about one. Social media has disturbed meaningful politics. I guess we can infer that because author is basically saying you are not connected but connected virtually. You are not organized but engaged. There are no consequences to the actions and so on. So I guess A, I can infer, right? I can assume that that is an assumption, right? B, that's my answer. All right. Pause the video and give it a try. All right. India's structural transformation, particularly since 91, has been slow and unique. Despite abundant low-skilled labor, our growth trajectory has mostly skipped manufacturing, growing instead on the back of a far smaller high-skilled services sector. Consequently, the bulk of jobs our economy generated even in its peak growth years was in the largely informal, low value add construction sector. The distributional consequence of this have been significant. So basically, author is trying to say that since 1991, the structural transformation has been slow and unique. So slow, I understand. Unique is something that is weird, or weird. So unique, I don't know whether he is using it in a positive sense or in a negative sense. So that only the rest of the sentences will say. Despite abundant low skilled labor, our growth trajectory has mostly skipped manufacturing, growing instead on the back of a far smaller high skilled service sector. So basically, this is also one of the criticisms of 1991 LPG reforms, right? That India industrially was backward. So we were agriculturally we were good. Industrial revolution we kind of skipped, and then we became a service based economy. So that middle portion that we skipped, right? Because of that, our the manufacturing sector, or rather, what do you call it, the industrial revolution kind of thing didn't happen in India, is what usually the criticism of LPG reforms is. And I guess that's what is discussed here as well. Underemployment and low intergenerational mobility have been persistent features of the Indian economy, resulting in deep inequalities. Most of India continues to live in extremely precarious economic conditions with limited opportunity. Growth lifted a large population out of poverty. However, as the World Bank data show, most of those who escaped poverty between 5 and 12 moved into what they call the vulnerable group, one income shock away from falling below the poverty line. So basically, even if much of the people have been shifted to poverty or above poverty line, but the problem in that is it's the foundation is not strong. The moment something goes wrong, all of those people will will fell before the below poverty line. Okay, the based on the passage above, the following assumptions have been made. Okay, availability of low skilled labor may promote the development of manufacturing sector. I guess that is what he said, that we have informal sector, right? So maybe having those low skilled labor may promote the development of manufacturing sector. So that, I guess, is mentioned. Largely informal, underemployment and low, most of the countries to live in extremely poverty and all of that, right? Service sector can thrive even on a small workforce. Can I infer that? Even in SP growth years was the large low value add. Okay. The peak growth year of 5 and 12 helped the service sector grow faster. However, as the World Bank data show, most of those who escape poverty between 5 and 12 move into what they call the vulnerable group. Did this peak help service sector grow faster? I guess I cannot infer that. All I can say is between 5 and 12, a lot of people were taken out of poverty, but they are still on the edge, like one fine shock and they are gone, right? So 3 I for sure know is not an assumption. So gone. So I guess 1 and 2 is only remaining, but I'm not really sure about 1 and 2 as well, but lack of the answer option, so I'll mark that as the answer. Okay, so just knowing one of the statement is not an answer, that also helps sometime, right? Let's move to next one. All right, pause the video, give it a try. All right, women are most often the collectors, users and managers of water in household, as well as the farmers of irrigated crops. For example, at least half of the world's food is grown by women farmers, and it amounts to 80% in some African countries. Whereas African women increasingly assume a vital role in agriculture, they remain among the most disadvantaged populations. Okay, so for example, at least half of the world's food is grown by women farmers, and it amounts to 80% in some African countries. Whereas African women increasingly assume a vital role in agriculture, they remain among the most disadvantaged populations. So most of the, okay, at least half of the world's food is grown by women farmers. Number of women farmers or percentage is as high as 80% in African countries. At the same time, women are the most disadvantaged ones. So that means you can infer that maybe because of agriculture they are disadvantaged ones. So we don't know. I am just kind of connecting the dots here. Easier access to fresh water would improve living conditions for girls who generally drop out of school and start working in the fields and fetching water at a very young age. Okay. Lack of access of water is an obstacle to their right to have access to formal education. So basically, that's how author started. Most women are often the collector, users, and managers of water. So making sure the water is available, chances are women will be taken out of that disadvantaged group. Which of the following are the most rational and logical inferences that can be drawn? Okay, women of the world could be considered as the feeder of the world population. Women of the world would be considered as the feeder of the world population. Can I infer that? I can, because women are producing at least half of the world's food that is being produced, right? Half of them at least is being produced by women farmers. So I guess I can infer that. Both Indian and African women end up losing their education opportunity due to their responsibility of fetching water. Where is Indian mentioned? We are only discussing African, right? We are only discussing African. There is no Indian. So I guess two I cannot infer. One only. Okay. Okay. Next question. Pause the video. Give it a try. All right. Many of us wrongly assume that the board examination results provide a neutral assessment of a child's intellectual ability. A low score does not indicate a lack of knowledge about a subject. A student who is an excellent writer, for instance, might struggle to pick the right answer in a multiple choice grammar test. Similarly, it is easy to assume that students who score high in maths are good at processing information, reasoning, and abstraction. Very good. But that's not always the case. It is often seen that there is no correlation between memorizing, attention span, and the speed of processing information. There's no correlation between what? Memorizing, attention span, and speed of processing information. Most times, high test scores simply mean excellence at rote memorization and solving multiple choice questions. A board result should therefore be only seen as an additional data point on student learning. It should not occasion value judgment. So it's basically saying, people say it's a piece of paper. How can it decide your future? So it's something like that. It's just a piece of paper. Don't take it as a reflection of a person. A person can be much more than that. You take that as one of the inputs in understanding that person, but don't take that as the only input, is what author is trying to say. Which one of the following statement best reflect the most logical, rational, and practical suggestion implied by the passage given above? Okay. We must abandon the board examination evaluation system. No, he is not completely against that. He is against the over importance of that. Right? He is not against the examination as such. We should give complete freedom to children to invest in their abilities in different domains. Even if, okay, you cannot infer this. We have to look at practical suggestions implied by the author. Now, practical suggestion has to be based on something that should be done with regards to these board examinations and the results. This altogether is a different topic, allowing children to do what they want based on their abilities. It has nothing to do with the board exam or the results, right? So this kind of is alien. Board examinations marks should be counted as one of the learning outcomes. I guess that I can infer. He is simply saying, consider it as one of the outcomes, nothing more than that. For each student, the evaluation process should be different. No, he is definitely not saying that. C is what my answer is in this case. Okay. Next question, give it a try. Pause the video. All right. Sorry. All right. Given that cities are concentrated centers of population and economic activities, any impact and disruption, whether natural or human induced, has the potential to affect vast number of people. Okay. concentrated centers of population. Okay, any impact and disruption, whether natural or human, affect the vast number of people. So it's like, take an example of Mumbai. The density is very high per square kilometer. One natural calamity and most of the people will get disrupted, right? Now, don't think about Mumbai rains. It's unfortunate that we think Mumbai rains as a calamity. Rains all over the world are just one of the natural phenomenon. It's in India we call it a calamity, so it's kind of unfortunate for us. But anyway, the expected impact of climate change poses a massive challenge to cities. These impacts will vary from city to city as well as within the city. For instance, coastal cities are vulnerable to rising sea levels, to more intense precipitation that increases the likelihood of flooding in low lying areas and landslide on steep slopes, and to extend the heat waves that threaten cities unaccustomed to very hot summers. A lot of natural phenomena and calamities are discussed. Okay, in every city, the poorest populations are the most vulnerable because they have the least adaptive capacity and often occupy areas that are more exposed to hazards. Because they don't have any other places to go, they will go to the places that are available, and generally these places could be harmful, right? Building resilience and adapting to climate change are therefore a high priority for cities. Yet, city managers and practitioners serving the urban poor often point out that the multiple competing priorities are challenging enough. Paying attention to uncertain future climate impacts is thus seen as the lower priority. The authorities are already so stressed with the current priorities, they don't have time for any imaginative priority or calamity that may come in future, and for that I should do something. So author is saying authorities are least bothered about what may happen in future. They already have so many things to worry about right now. Okay, so which one of the following best reflects the most practical and lasting solution to the problem mentioned in the passage above? Okay, all right. Cities should not be settled in areas prone to hazards like low-lying areas on steep slope. No, it's not like you can't ask people to not settle somewhere, right? So that's not a very practical solution. Cities should be made disaster resilient and follow the principle of build back together, build back better. Build back better is basically what will happen after the disaster. The author is the author is talking about care, not the cure. This is the cure part. The disaster has occurred. What is it that you can do now? Author is not discussing about building after the disaster. Author is more talking about care. What is it that you can do to be more disaster resilient? That means if disaster were to occur, what is it that we would do that would help, that would not harm us more, right? Cities should have robust public transport and industries based on clean technology. Public transport is one small solution, right? We are talking about big disasters. Public transportation is one small solution. Urban planners should make policies with co-benefits to urban poverty reduction and adaptation to climate change. I guess this makes sense. Author has said somewhere that poverty is one of the hindrance. That is the reason why they settle wherever they get a chance. And adaptation to climate change. Author has also mentioned that because of poverty, the people are not really adaptable. That means what? They cannot adapt to the situation very easily. So D makes our answer in this case. All right. Let's try this one. Pause the video, give it a try. All right. With the weakening of democracy, corruption is also on the rise, working hand in hand, feeding on the weakened institutions and fundamentally unjust systems of power. Okay. With the weakening of democracy, corruption is also on the rise. So because of democracy has been weakened, corruption is rising. Okay. Without effective protection, elections can be a central component in cycles of systemic corruption. This is increasingly true as even autocratic leaders use elections for some form of legitimacy for their rule. During elections, vote buying, bribery, and the abuse of state resources can be used to influence and coerce voters. To tackle the roots of political corruption and push back on autocracy, democratic actors must confront opaque and illicit political funding and spending. From influence peddling to state capture, some have called illicit campaign finance the original sin of corruption because of the way it builds and bonds corrupt links between the public and private sector. So author is talking how weakened democracy gives rise to corruption, and then we are talking something in particular what happens during elections, vote buying, bribery, dash dash dash. To tackle the roots of political corruption, democratic atom must come open illicit political funding and spending. So author says that one of the biggest cause of corruption is election, which in turn is one of, so the cause for that is basically political funding and all, right? Based on the passage above, the following assumptions have been made. Which of the above assumptions is or are invalid? So we are talking about invalid assumptions. Okay. So let's look for the valid ones first. State funding of elections could solve the issue of electoral corruption. State funding of elections. State funding of election. State funding of elections. And it would what? It would could solve the issue of electoral corruption. I guess this is not an assumption. It's just one of the ways. You cannot say that just you do this and corruption will end. Right? That's not the way. The regular elections do not guarantee the existence of true democracy. I guess I'm still fine with this. I'm okay with this option because we are discussing that during the elections most of the illicit activities are happening, right? But there is still a democracy. You cannot say that because elections have been illicit there is no true democracy. Election is one of the tools of democracy only. So I guess two, I'm fine, but I'm still not sure. It is not possible to deal with political corruptions even with democracy in place. No, author is not saying it. Author has given some of the ways, right? So author is not saying that at all. So 1 and 3 are invalid according to me. 2 I am not really sure. So 1 and 3 are here. 1 and 3 are here. Now let's talk about 2 again. Regular elections do not guarantee the existence of true democracy. Regular elections do not guarantee the existence of true democracy. No, it's mentioned here, no? Even autocratic leaders use elections for the legitimacy. That means what? Elections actually kind of reflects the democracy. The illicit funding and illicit political activities during elections kind of causes the dent in the democracy, right? So you can say that elections by themselves do not guarantee, fair election may guarantee, right? So 2, I guess I can still kind of assume, right? So C is what my answer is. Okay. Let's move to next. Okay. Pause the video, give it a try. All right. We are living in a world where the electronic gadget you buy today is deemed obsolete in less than a year and replaced by another with more advanced capabilities. Smartphone makers, for example, release a new model every year with new features, and for many, not replacing one's perfectly functional smartphone with the latest model is being out of fashion. Okay. India is the fastest growing market in the world for smartphones with 27 million units shipped in the second quarter of 2016 alone. And though the lifespan of a mobile phone is higher in India than in the West, one can imagine the number of obsolete phones contributing to electronic waste. So author is basically trying to say every year you are getting a new phone, features are getting upgraded. Even if India's what is the word that you use? Lifespan. Even if the lifespan of a mobile phone is higher in India, that means what? We don't generally change our phone regularly, even if the newer version has come in the market. We are still the fastest growing market. That means we are still buying a lot of phones every year as compared to the rest of the world. Now, because people are buying new phones more often than not, because we are the fastest growing nation in terms of smartphone sales. That means we might also be a country who would kind of discard the old phones, right? So if that is the case, the e-waste would pile up, or the number of e-waste is gonna rise, right? So which of the following is assumptions have been made? Okay. Indians take good care of their smartphones as compared to their Western counterparts. We don't know whether we take good care of phones. We only know that the lifespan is high. Now, we may not take good care of the phone, and the screen guard is broken, or the battery is not working, but we still use the phone, right? So that's what the author is trying to say, that that's how the lifespan is at. That doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, we take good care of phone, that's why the lifespan is high. That is not the case. Changing smartphones in today's world has become a style statement. I guess that is true. He talked about where is that, out of fashion kind of thing. If you are not changing your phone, it's out of fashion. So 2 is definitely there. This is gone, this is gone. Either 2 or 2 and 3. India must come up with adequate environmental rules for handling tons of e-waste generated through obsolete phones. That's not what author has mentioned. Author has not even touched what are the existing rules and what is the improvement needed. Author has only hinted that e-waste is gonna be piling up. How do you deal with that? Author has not mentioned that. So I guess 3 I cannot infer. So 2 only. All right. Pause the video, give it a try. All right. Scientists might have a resolution to growing concerns of climate change hampering crop productivity. Researchers have identified genes in Africa's local food crops that can improve resistance to drought. Incorporating these genes through hybridization might improve crop yield that is affected by increasing global temperatures and heat waves. Countries like India and Pakistan are also likely to be affected by the prolonged heat waves. The United Nations Environmental Programme UNEP estimated the UN body is responsible for coordinating responses to environmental issues. Orphan crops are nutritious. Orphan crops are nutritious local food crops that could play a crucial role in combating hunger. So this is one of the solutions that author is trying to give. Oops, I'm sorry. These crops are not traded internationally but have adapted themselves to grow in harsh weather conditions. Africa's arid environment is not suited for crops like rice and maize. Orphan crops like finger millets, little millet, African yam bean, jojoba, and jatropha are commonly found in the continent. That's okay. Based on the passage, which of the following assumptions have been made? Which of the following assumptions are valid? Okay. Africa has the potential to fight hunger without dependence on other countries. No, that is not mentioned. Rather, he is saying that Africa is suffering. Right? Some Africa is not suited for crops like rice and maize. Right? So Africa by itself is unable to take care of itself. Right? UNEP should promote the trade of orphan crops from Africa to other hunger affected continents. That's not what is discussed, right? UN body is responsible for coordinating responses to environmental issues. It's not there to coordinate which country should produce which crop and which crop to be exported and imported. UN body is responsible for coordinating responses to environmental issues. Right? So I guess 2 also I cannot infer. So neither. Okay. All right. Give it a try. Pause the video. All right. Social networks such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter are now integrated into most people's everyday lives. The users of social networks no longer just use them to keep in touch with friends, but increasingly facilitate social networks to search for information. Okay, users also form opinions based on the information and contributions available on social networks. While searching for information integrated into their opinion info formation, users are no longer just passive recipients of information in online social networks, but are also actively spreading their own opinions. All right. So, in general, what we do on social media, that's always discussed here. Based on the passage above, following assumptions have been made. Okay. Information available on social networks must be verified for correct opinion information. It must be verified, or if I assume that, that means what? Everything must be verified. But he is not saying that, right? Author is saying that you can come and comment, users also form opinion based on the information available on social networks. So they are necessarily, I'm sorry, they are not necessarily verifying it, right? I guess this is not a valid assumption. Opinions made through social media are not reliable due to instances of fake news. Where is that mentioned? Okay, I guess we're not talking about fake news or anything in general in that manner. Okay. Social networks act as a medium for exercising the right to freedom of speech. I guess that I can assume, because if that assumption is true, then only I can say that people post and seek information there, right? So 3 I can assume. C. That's my answer. Oops. All right. Pause the video, give it a try. All right. Human rights principles inform the content of good governance efforts. They may inform the development of legislative frameworks, policies, programs, budgetary allocations, and other measures. On the other hand, without good governance, human rights cannot be respected and protected sustainably. The implementation of human rights relies on a conducive and enabling environment. This includes appropriate legal frameworks and institutions, as well as political, managerial, and administrative processes responsible for responding to the rights and needs of the population. So, we are discussing human rights in general and what is it that is covered in that. On the other hand, without good governance, how the misuse of human rights can be done. It cannot be respected and protected. This includes appropriate legal framework. So you need to have good legal backing to it as well, is what author is trying to say. Okay. Which of the following assumptions have been made? Good governance and human rights are mutually reinforcing. I guess I can infer that, because if you have good governance, which is to say you have better laws and you have what do you call it? You call it law, it's the law of the land, right? And people are more respectable towards the law, right? Or law is enforceable by the state. That is happening on a real good scale. Chances are human rights will also be respected, and vice versa. So basically they are mutually reinforcing. One kind of reinforces the other. So I can assume that. It is not easy to realize human rights without proper frameworks, institutions, and processes. This is also true, because again 1 and 2 are almost similar. If you don't have a law or a powerful law to back your human rights, or you don't have powerful force that can implement the law in a better manner, human rights won't matter, right, much. So 1 and 2 both can be my assumptions. So C is my answer in this case. Okay. All right. Let's look at next question. Give it a try. Pause the video. All right. When physical activity is used as a break from academic learning time, post-engagement effects include better attention, increased on-task behaviors, and improved academic performance. So basically, if you have physical activity as a part of your curriculum and they are spaced in between your learning time, so you learn, let's say you do some physical activity, then you again learn, so something like that. If you have that, then better attention is there, increased on task behavior is there, improved academic performance. So basically advantages of that. Comparisons between first grade students housed in a classroom with uh, with with stand decks where the child could stand at his or her discretion, and in classrooms containing traditional furniture showed that the former children were highly likely to stand, thus expending significantly more energy than those who were seated. More important, teachers can offer physical activity breaks as part of a supplemental curriculum or simply as a way to reset student attention during a lesson, and when provided with minimal training can efficaciously produce vigorous or moderate energy expenditure in students. So basically, you don't necessarily have to plan your day like that. Let's say you are teaching, as simple as ask them to stand up, sit down, or have some activity done then and there in the classroom itself. Even that is beneficial, is what author is trying to say. Further, after school physical activity programs have demonstrated the ability to improve cardiovascular endurance, and this increase in aerobic fitness has been shown to mediate improvements in academic performance as well as the allocation of neural resources underlying performance on a working memory task. So basically, again, advantages of having physical activity not only during your learning time but even after your school time, right? Physical activity is important in child's daily life because it helps in breaking the monotonous pattern in life. That is true. Otherwise, there will be a lack of physical development in the child. I don't know lack of what the lack of physical activity will do. That is not discussed. What I know is what the presence of physical activity will do. That I definitely know. It improves cognitive functions related to attention and memory to facilitate learning. I guess this is also true. Consistent engagement in physical activity can help students refine social skills. Again, social skills is kind of alien here. It helps in breaking the monotonous pattern of life. Okay. It improves cognitive functions related to human attention and memory to facilitate learning. Human related to attention and memory. Did we discuss? Okay, better attention, on task behavior. So I guess C is what I will mark in that case. Okay. Right. Let's look at next question. Okay. Pause the video and give it a try. All right. It is said women hold up half the sky, yet barely 90% of Indian women working age participated in the labor force in 2021 as per the World Bank. Okay. The question which must haunt India and its policymakers is, can a nation harness its political when women stay out of the labor force? Okay, so basically we are talking about how important women workforce is, right? The history of economic development is explicit about necessary and sufficient conditions for prosperity. No large economy has attained its level without the participation of women in the workforce. So again, we are discussing, if you want to have a development, if you want to have an economic development, how important it is to have women in the workforce. Female labor force participation rate in G7 countries ranges between 42 and 61%. India trail all its peers among the BRICS nation on female workforce participation rate. So here we know it's 19 and we need to reach somewhere about 42 and 61 as per the data from the developed economies, right? There is much lather about political empowerment of women, one facet being reservation of seats in parliament. Whether that alone will change the stronghold of circumstance is an open question. India has had just women as a prime minister, and the current Lok Sabha has just over 75 women MPs. There is no disputing that social and economic conditions are a contributory factor. Clearly, the run of the mill policies are not enough, and there is need to install affirmative intervention. There is merit in the argument that economic empowerment enables and propels political empowerment. So, this is basically to say what is the current condition of, let's say, parliament or the women prime minister or so. And it goes on to draw a line between economic empowerment and political empowerment. So it says that one has to propel the other in order to kind of improve. I'm sorry. Yeah. So which of the following essentially implied in the above passage? So we are looking at something that can be implied, right? Which is to say something that can be done. Reservation of seats in Indian Parliament for women is needed for their economic empowerment. So author is kind of criticizing that move in a way, saying that it's not enough. You need more intervention to install affirmative intervention. That means what you are doing currently is not enough. You need something more, right? So whether it is needed or not, we don't know. There currently is some reservation, but author is not saying that we need more. Author is simply saying we need political empowerment. So I can keep A aside. India has the lowest levels of female workforce participation in rate in South Asia. So two problem here. It talks about lowest. Now we don't know what is lowest. We know it is lowest when it comes to BRICS nation. But are Southern Asian nations BRIC nations necessarily? No. So again, this doesn't make sense. Participation of women in the workforce is a necessary condition for prosperity. I guess this I can definitely imply from the passage, because if you see explicit about necessary and sufficient condition. What is necessary and sufficient condition? Necessary is something that is make or break. It has to be there in order to succeed. Sufficient is it's good enough to be there, right? Now, after this particular sentence, the author goes on to explain why women participation in workforce is necessary. So we can imply that women participation in workforce is a necessary condition for the prosperity. So C, I can definitely imply. D, India is expected to continue have the largest number of women in working age population. I guess it's exactly opposite of that. Percentage wise, India is the lowest. That's what author has discussed. So we don't know about this at all. Right? Okay, let's move to next question. Pause the video, give it a try. All right. Hyperconsumption is a curse of our modern times. Hyperconsumption, so it's like consumption in excessive manner, right? Humans generate monumental amounts of waste, a sizable portion of which is disposed of in landfills and through waste to energy incinerators. However, billions of tons of garbage, including microplastics, never make it to landfills or incinerators and end up in the oceans. This garbage chokes marine life and disturbs, I don't know what this is, but I'm assuming something related to stability of the ocean or so, which is vital to the elimination of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay. In India, nearly 60% of the household waste is wet organic waste with low calorific value. This makes options such as waste to energy in incinerators inefficient, right? So, in all, hyperconsumption is a curse in modern times, and anyway the effects are bad. In India it's much worse, because 60% is wet waste which cannot be converted into energy, right? Which one of the following statement best reflects the crux of the passage? Incineration is not the best technological solution for waste processing in India. I guess this is fine. This is what the last sentence means. So this is basically what the author wants to conclude. So this is fine. Reducing consumption will solve the issue of waste generation. Reducing consumption. Now, did we talk about consumption? We only said that we are in a hyper consumption state, but after that it's all about waste, right? So I'm not really sure about this. Incinerators shall be established in and around the landfills for faster processing on waste. No, author is saying it's rather inefficient, because it, in particular India, 60% of our waste is wet, right? So incinerators wouldn't be helpful. India should develop customized incinerators to ensure processing of organic waste. That's not the crux of the passage. Otherwise, author would have kind of given more information about what are the current processes and where is the scope of improvement. So D doesn't make sense. A is my answer in that case. Okay. Let's move to the next one. All right. Pause the video, give it a try. Okay. What makes identity politics a significant departure from earlier pre-identitarian forms of politics of recognition is its demand for recognition on the basis of the very grounds on which recognition has previously been denied. It is qua women, qua blacks, qua lesbians that groups demand recognition. So that means what? Layer prior forms of politics of is its demand for the basis of the very grounds on which. So it's basically saying you are trying to get a recognition for a certain group which was on the basis of very grounds on which recognition was previously denied. So it's like the same grounds on which your recognition was denied, you are demanding the recognition on those same grounds, right? The demand is not for inclusion within the fold of universal humankind on the basis of shared human attributes, nor is it for respect in spite of one's differences. Rather, what is demanded is respect for oneself as different. So its author is basically trying to say, if you are trying to recognize yourself as a group of certain kind of a people, you are not demanding equality, you are basically demanding that treat us different from others because we are different. So it's kind of a controversial passage, but whatever it is, let's solve. With reference to the above passage, which one of the following statements is or are correct? Pre-identitarian forms of politics were inclusive and non-divisive in nature. We don't know that. We only know that what we have today and what we had before are two different things. That doesn't mean that the previous one was better. Right? Nothing of that sort has been mentioned. So this doesn't make sense. Everyone has the legal right to recognition everywhere as an individual. No. If that was the case, then why would these guys demand for a special recognition, right? So none of those make sense. So D is my answer. Okay. Good. Next question, give it a try, pause the video. All right. The ignorance of class difference that are necessitated in democracy's pursuit of equality makes it vulnerable to class conflict. So ignorance of class differences makes it vulnerable to class conflict. So that means if you are going to ignore the class differences, chances are you are going in for a conflict. By institutionalizing class disparities into a balanced representative structure, republicanism attempts to preserve order between distinctive subdivisions of society. Also, the pursuit of complete negative liberty in pure democracies is susceptible to anarchic disorder as it disregards the law. The responsibility to uphold the law, typically maintained in the form of a constitution by both the government and the individual, is essential in a republic for the preservation of societal order. So, author is in all trying to say it's not the only duty of the government to preserve the societal order. It's very much an individual's responsibility as well, right? Now there is if institutes are gonna ignore the class differences, chances are the class conflicts is imminent, right? Now, which one of the following statements best reflects the crux of the passage? Best reflects the crux of the passage. Okay. Limitations of democracy regarding societal order can be handled through the constitution. Limitation of democracy regarding social order can be handled through the constitution. So we have discussed constitution where we are saying that that is the utmost law, right? Responsibility to uphold the law typically maintained in the form of constitution. Okay, so this is fine. Let me look at the others. Democracy, due to inherent flaws is not the best political model for governance. That's not the crux of the passage. We are only discussing one particular issue, class conflict, right? Just because there is a class conflict doesn't mean democracy is bad. It's just one part of democracy. Right? So we cannot make a statement on democracy basis that only governments following a constitution can guarantee the preservation of social order. Again, only. That means what? It's going extreme. That only those guys can follow and nobody else. So that's an extreme one. The pursuit of equality in a democracy is the bedrock for preventing class conflicts. It's not like you pursue just because you want to pursue equality in democracy, you are going to turn your blind eye towards the class conflicts, right? That's not how it happens. You have to kind of face the challenges, at the same time maintain the equality, right? So saying that this is the bedrock for preventing class conflicts, I guess this is an overstatement. This is quite an extreme one. A seems to be an appropriate one in this case. Okay. Okay. Let's go to next one. Pause the video, give it a try. Okay. The death penalty is sometimes justified because the majority of people support it in the abstract. The Supreme Court, in attempting to determine whether a punishment is cruel and unusual, asks whether the punishment comports with society's evolving standards of decency. The court has been reluctant to rely on opinion polls to measure these standards because poll results can vary widely depending on the polling firm and the specific wording of the questions asked. Instead, the court has looked at the actions of state legislatures and the decisions of juries, prosecutors, and governors as reflecting public will. The myriad of disturbing facts about the death penalty has led to a sharp decline in its use. Ultimately, the future of the death penalty will depend on whether it is retaining public support. Okay, so we are discussing about death penalty and how the court has kind of refused to look at the polls to understand what is the public perception. Rather, they went to the state legislatures and decisions of juries there to understand what is it that public are thinking regarding death penalty, and that has resulted in sharp decline in its use. That means what? Maybe there was a negative perception about death penalty, and that is the reason why number of death penalty conferred or punished to the culprits has been decreased, has been on decline. So again, author says that it depends on public support. If public supports it, it will continue. If it doesn't, it will not continue, right? Which of the following is our most rational and logical inferences that can be drawn from the passage? I'm sorry. Okay. Death penalty should not have a place in modern societies as it is an unconstitutional act. This is definitely not true. This is a statement of opinion. If you see this particular paragraph, it has not taken any side. It's not saying that death penalty should be abolished or death penalty should be retained. Author is not saying any of that. Author is simply saying only time will tell. It will depend on public support. What is this option saying? That it should be abolished. There is should not have a place in modern society. So this is kind of an extreme. It's taking the argument to the extreme or to a conclusion. Author has not concluded anything. Awareness against the death penalty is a must for reducing the existing public support. Again, this is a must. This is more of an instruction. It's more of a diktat to what should be done and what should not be done. Again, we cannot infer anything that should be done or not. Only thing that we can infer is it is left to public as to whether they want it or not. Do they want it and how to influence them? That is not the discussion of the passage. So again, 2 is gone. So answer is D, neither. Okay. Next question, give it a try. All right. Economic resources are important for any disaster management, yet it has been recognized that economic resources did not necessarily translate into greater investment in this domain, as there is no dearth of issues that demand government's attention and resources. So we are talking about disaster management and how economic resources are important for that. Now, just because you have more investment doesn't mean you have more economic resources, is what the second statement is saying. Disaster management has seldom acquired importance in agenda of governance unless there is a major natural or man-made disaster. It has been observed that states which have suffered major disasters are more likely to undertake policy reform in building capacities for tackling them. In rural areas, Panchayat Raj institutions are democratically decentralized bodies that can display tremendous potential in disaster management as they are closer to the scene and have a better knowledge of local resources or weaknesses. However, their role has been limited mostly to the response phase of any disaster. So basically, what we are trying to say is, again, you are not caring, you are curing, you are not uh, having the preparedness before disaster occurs. You are just responding once the disaster has happened, right? On the basis of the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Which of them are valid? Okay. Disaster management is not a priority in India. Uh, I mean, you can't say it's not a priority, but it's like it comes down in the priority. It comes down quite in the end in the priority list, is what I can assume. Because it says disaster management has seldom acquired importance. What do you mean by seldom? Seldom is basically rarely, or you know, it's quite rare that it happens basically. So you can say it's not a priority. I guess you can safe to say that, but again, I wouldn't agree to it. But it's okay. In the context of this particular passage, we can say that. The role of Panchayati Raj institutions in framing disaster management policy needs to be widened. Again, that is true because author is saying that they are only doing the recovery stuff. They are not doing the preparedness stuff. So their scope has to be widened. So you can say that. So both 1 and 2 makes sense. Okay. Okay. Let's go to next. So this one is a bigger one. Give it a try. All right. Ghalib's poem was composed against the backdrop of the decline of the Mughal Empire. His home territory, the Indo-Gangetic Plain, once ruled by a single monarch, was now split between contending chiefdoms and armies. Brother was fighting brother, unity and federation were being undermined. But even as he wrote, a new power was asserting its influence across the land in the form of the British, who were steadily acquiring control of the greater part of the subcontinent. Then, in 1857, large sections of the native population rose up in what the colonists called the Sepoy Mutiny, and Indian nationalists later referred to as the First War of Indian Independence. Some of the bloodiest fighting was in Ghalib's hometown, Delhi, still nominally the capital of the Mughals and in time to become the capital of the British Raj as well. So we are talking about time back then. Okay, Delhi was yet to be the capital of British Raj. So don't confuse it that this is the current time passage. Okay, his own sympathies were divided. He was the recipient of a stipend from the new rulers, it a product of Mughal culture and refinement. So you see the conflict of his emotions. He is drawing his salary from the British, but his culture derives from the Mughals, right? He saw more clearly than the British colonists did then, or the Indian nationalist does now, that it was impossible here to separate right from wrong, that horrible atrocities were committed by both sides. So that means both British as well as Mughals were committing the atrocities. Marooned in his home, he wrote a melancholy account of how Hindustan has become the arena of mighty whirlwind and the blazing fire. To what new order can the Indian look with joy? He asked. So basically, he is posing a question out of concern. What will happen now? Right? With reference to the above passage, consider the following statements. Which of the following are correct? Okay. Ghalib was born in Delhi. I don't know where he was born. I know it was his hometown. That means he must have spent most of his life or at least his childhood in Delhi. But we don't know whether he was born there or not. So 1 definitely is not part of my answer. So 3 definitely is. Delhi remained the capital even after the mutiny. So that we know that he mentioned here. Event of 1857 was differently interpreted by different sections of people. Yes, because some called it Sepoy Mutiny, some called it, and Indian nationalists call it the First War of Indian Independence. So sections of people called it with different names. So 2 and 3 both make sense. So that's your answer. Okay. All right. Pause the video. Give it a try. All right. Western is the procedure by which sociologists gain access to the meanings behind human actions. Western require researchers to place themselves in the position of the individual they deserve to see and comprehend the meanings behind the person's action and meanings attached to the motivation, purposes, or outcomes of their actions. This becomes important as actions can have different meanings in different cultures and societies. Without proper investigation, one is at a risk of misrepresenting the data collected. A good example would be body gestures like handshakes, hugs, waving, and clapping among others in different cultures. So it's basically what is this process? This process is you observe a person's behavior and then you backtrack. What is it that is, what is the attitude of that person? What are his value system? What is the decision making process that compelled him to make certain actions or something like that? This is that procedure, I guess. Okay. Which one of the following statement best reflects the crux of the passage? Okay. Western can be used to predict human actions in future. No, this is more of a prediction that it will be doing that. No, it's not that. Results provided by Westerns are context specific. I guess this I can infer because requires research to place themselves in the position of the individual. So as you are observing an individual, the decisions taken by that individual are those context specific. The same person may take different decision in different contexts, right? So I guess this could be true, but let's look at others. Western can give misleading results if not applied properly. No, this is actually the way to eliminate misrepresentation. It's without proper investigation, one is at a risk of misrepresenting. So in order to avoid that, you do this Western procedure. So it's actually opposite of that. The motivation of person behind his action can't be comprehended. That was true. Why would people perform this procedure, right? So D is again not true. So B is the answer in this case. Okay. All right. Give it a try. Pause the video. Give it a try. All right. Various factors help people in believing that people from different countries hold different values. Such factors are cognitive, social learning, and stereotyping processes. Example, illusionary correlation may lead us to encode other groups' characteristics in ways that magnify the differences between the groups. More relevant, however, is the nature of the concept of the value itself. Specifically, as abstract ideals, values subsume a wide range of behaviors as examples of the concepts. Okay, so let's read it again. Let me erase. Various factors help people in believing that people from different countries hold different values. Okay. Such factors are cognitive, social learning, and stereotyping processes. So basically, your society and the stereotypes in that society are basically differentiate between learnings of different people and different culture and different values. Illusory correlation may lead us to encode other groups in ways that magnify the differences between groups. Okay. More relevant, however, is the nature of the concept of the value itself. Okay. So value itself and the nature of the concept of that. Okay. Specifically, as abstract ideals, values subsume a wide range of behaviors as examples of the concept. People may perceive differences between social groups because of the differences between groups in the specific behaviors that are seen as exemplars of different values, even if other behaviors that are examples of these values do not differ. Thus, by thinking about groups in terms of concrete instances, differences may be stronger than similarities. Okay. In other words, people in different social groups may endorse the same values but associate different behaviors with them. For example, the value of equality may be linked to comparisons between men and women in countries where gender equality is promoted, but not in countries where gender equality is not part of the political agenda. So basically what he is trying to say is there is a value and that derives your behavior. Just okay. So there is a value and that derives your behaviors, right? Now what author is trying to say is you may derive another behavior from the same value, right? So I'll tell you what is the difference. Okay, let me just put it this way. So this is a little bit of GAN. Your value always derive your beliefs. Okay, your beliefs derive your attitudes, and your attitudes derive your behavior. Okay, so value derives beliefs, beliefs derives attitudes, attitude derives behavior. What author is trying to say is the same value can derive two different behaviors. Let's say behavior 1 and let's say behavior 2, right? I'll tell you one example. Okay, suppose my value system says that you should always help your society, right? Now there is another person who also thinks same, that they should kind of help the society in whichever manner possible. Let's say I am someone who does that by donating, let's say, some amount to charity every month, versus the other person kind of fulfills the same value by different behavior, maybe doing some community service every week, right? Now both of us are different in our behavior, but our values are same, right? So that's what this guy is trying to say. The value of differences may be stronger than similarities. That means what, our behaviors may be much more different than the similarities, right? So same value, but two different behaviors can be derived, right? So that was a little bit of GAN, but it's okay, right? So based on the above passage, what kind of relationship exists between group values and behavior? Behavior can reflect the group values. Yes, sometimes they reflect. All the time they reflect, basically, because your behavior is driven from your values. So this is true. Different behaviors may stem out of the same group value. So that's what we discussed just now. So 1 and 2. C is the answer. Both 1 and 2 is the answer in this case. Okay. All right. Pause the video, give it a try. Okay. Biotechnology has brought advances in animal husbandry. Today's farm animals are larger and grow faster than their ancestors. Cattle, for example, are grazing animals. Their digestive system has evolved to process grasses and other crops. Corn and other grains cause a cow's digestive system to become acidic. That makes it easier for dangerous bacteria such as to develop. Bacterial infections can be harmful to the cow and can also infect the milk and meat consumed by people. Antibiotics are spliced into DNAs of feed corn to prevent such infection. Antibiotics have been used since the 1950s to stimulate cattle growth. Over time, this practice has led to the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria in cattle and people. Many cattle are also given antibiotic steroids or growth hormones to make them get bigger and faster. I guess, if not exactly, but somewhat similar question was asked in, I guess, 2021 or 22 CSAT, where they were discussing about antibiotics given for the growth of the animals. Okay, so this is from the similar lines of that. Okay, which one of the following statements best implies the suggestion given by the author of the passage? So I'm sorry. Which of the following statement best implies the suggestion given by the author of the passage? Okay. To prevent the creation of antibiotic resistant microorganisms in cattle and people, there is an urgent need to reduce the use of antibiotics. I guess this I can definitely say. Author is basically urging that stop using or don't use antibiotics other than the actual purpose, which is antibacterial. If you are using it for promoting the growth or making them bulky, stop doing that, because then they are developing antibacterial resistant, which would make the antibiotics ineffective in future in case they get infected with some disease, right? So A definitely makes sense. Research should be done to evolve some alternatives to the harmful use of antibiotics. No, See, author is not against antibiotics. Author is against the misuse of antibiotics. Okay, so there is nothing wrong with antibiotics. There are no harmful use of antibiotics. It's just that people are misusing it. Right? Use of biotechnology has negative side effects. This is too broad. You understand? This is too broad. We are talking about only one field of biotechnology, which is antibiotics, and in that also very specific use case where animals are being injected by it to promote their growth, right? It's very specific in nature. Commenting that the whole biotechnology has negative side effects, it's far too fetched. Biotechnology can be used to reduce antibiotic resistance among people, can be used to reduce antibiotic resistance. Reduce antibiotic resistance. That means increase biotic resistance. So reduce and anti, they will nullify each other. That means increase biotic resistance. So biotechnology can be used. I don't know. We are only talking about antibiotics here. And among people, we are discussing about animals here, right? So A is my answer in this case. Okay. Go ahead, pause the video, give it a try. Scientists are actively debating whether there is a fixed limit to the human capital span. Some biologists think the data shows that aging is not a disease that can be treated, but instead an inevitable process that cannot be fully stopped, whether through medical breakthroughs or other means. Some demographers have argued that there is a natural limit to life expectancy, implied that maximum ages will level off as well. Okay. But others think there's good evidence that lifespans will continue to lengthen, at least for a lucky few. Several prominent biologists and medical experts have recently published findings suggesting there is some hope for extending lifespans dramatically via medical interventions. Okay. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Human lifespan cannot be increased. No, it's saying na, for a lucky few, it will continue to lengthen. That means what, it's going to increase. It is not advisable to interfere with the natural lifespans of humans. No, we are actually interfering and lengthening it, right? So, none. Okay. Go ahead, pause the video, give it a try. All right. Generally, poverty cannot be reduced if economic growth does not occur. The persistent poverty of a substantial portion of the population can dampen the prospects of economic growth. Also, the initial distribution of income can greatly affect the prospects of growth and alleviation of mass property. So basically, poverty is a hindrance for growth. And what is the cause of poverty? One of the causes initial income distribution. That means, let's say when the Indian state was formed, what was the wealth distribution back then? Like what amount of wealth was owned by how many amount of people, and so on and so forth, right? Substantial evidence suggests that a highly unequal distribution of income is not conducive to either economic growth or poverty reduction. Experience has shown that if countries put in place incentive structures and complementary investments to ensure better health and education, it can lead to higher incomes, and the poor will benefit doubly through increased current consumption and higher future income. So basically, put in place incentive structures and complementary investments to ensure better health and education. So you basically put better health and education plan, chances are it will help you reduce the poverty, or basically something like that. It's the most rational and logical inferences that can be drawn. Okay. Only economic growth has the potential to overcome the menace of poverty. Again, only. So now you know it's quite a narrow option. So you can go back to the concept video where I discussed how to eliminate narrow and extreme options. So only word extreme, right? Health and education have a direct correlation with poverty reduction. This I can infer. That's why he is basically focusing on health and education. He is trying to say that you incentivize investment and exercising of the health and education, chances are that will reduce the poverty. So 2 definitely makes sense. So B, Bombay is my answer. Okay. All right. Give it a try. Pause the video. Okay. Typically, governments have relied on afforestation and reforestation as a means of establishing trees on non-treed land. These strategies have now evolved. The focus is now on forest landscape restoration, the process of regaining ecological functionality and improving human welfare across deforested and degraded forest landscapes. So basically, author is trying to say the focus has shifted from non-treed land. What is non-treed land? That means there was never a tree on that land. So don't go and plant trees there. You rather go and plant trees where earlier there was afforestation or there was a forest, and now you restore that forest in case if it's not there. So author is trying to say leave the non-treed land and focus more on the now barren but earlier treed lands, right? Which one of the following is the most logical and rational inference? With regards to deforestation, the government changed its strategy keeping in mind the people's need and multiple land utility. So that is definitely true. They have changed their strategy to use to plant more trees on the earlier forested land rather than planting trees on the non-treed lands. So BCD definitely should not be my answer, but let's check. The government wants to increase the area under forest cover in India. No, they want to increase forestation. That doesn't mean that they want to increase the forest under forest cover in India. Okay, they want to increase the number of plants. The government's focus on forest landscape restoration is due to its international commitments. No, there's no discussion of international commitments throughout. The earlier strategy of establishing trees on non-treed land had failed. No, we don't know whether it failed or passed. We only know that planting the trees on the land that earlier were forest is beneficial, or rather it's more advantageous than before. Doesn't mean that the before scheme had failed, right? All right, give it a try. All right. Within the freedom to choose are those endowments that make us uniquely human. In addition to self-awareness, we have imagination, the ability to create in our minds beyond our present reality. We have conscience, a deep inner awareness of right and wrong, of the principles that govern our behavior. I'm sorry. And a sense of the degree to which our thoughts and actions are in harmony with them. And we have an independent will, the ability to act based on our self-awareness, free of all other influences. So basically we are discussing the things that make us humans, or something that differentiate humans from animals. That's what we are discussing. What is it that makes us uniquely human? The self-awareness, imagination, conscience, what is that, independent will, and so on and so forth, right? Even the most intelligent animals have none of these endowments. To use a computer metaphor, they are programmed by instinct or training. They can be trained to be responsible. They can't take responsibility for that training. In other words, they can't direct it. They can't change the programming. They are not even aware of it. Okay. Which of the following is the most logical inference? If trained properly, animals can also exercise freedom of choice. Not at all discussed. Animals act as per their instincts. This is true. They are programmed by the instincts, right? Just like other animals. Animals are capable of taking responsibility for their innovative actions. No, not animals. Humans. Humans are capable. Training can make animals responsible, aware, and intelligent. No, it's only humans that can do that. So B, Bombay is the answer. Okay. Give it a try. Okay. So it's a repeat question. We talked about that antibiotics question, right? So the passage is same, the question is different. Based on the passage given above, the following assumptions have been made. Use of antibiotics among cattle should be reduced for preventing harmful effects on the population. use of antibiotics, do we want it to be reduced? We can in a way say that, okay, reduced use of antibiotics will lead to reduction in milk production, okay, I'm sorry. So we're not, okay, where was that milk wala thing? System to acidic, that makes it easier for danger to develop. The cow and can also infect the milk and meat consumed by the people. So reduced use of antibiotics will lead to reduction in milk. No, it's not the reduction in milk production. It's contamination of milk. You use too much antibiotics, the bacteria will grow resistant to that antibiotic. It will soon start mixing in the meat and the milk, which will infect it. It won't affect the ability to produce milk. Okay, so that's not his risk. Use of antibiotics among cattle should be reduced. I guess that is discussed. There is a rampant use of antibiotics in order to make them bulkier and make their meat more heavy. That has to be reduced, right? So one makes sense. So answer is A. Oops. Okay. Let give it a try. The globalization of Indian economy has dramatically influenced social life in India. The expansion of the middle class is said to have occurred as a consequence of this process. Based on ethnographic research among lower middle class families in India, there seems to be an apparent paradox between women's positive perceptions of empowerment and the overall negative impact of structural adjustment policies on women. So again, we are discussing about expansion of okay, we are discussing about the globalization and how it has influenced the social life, right? Which also has impacted how we perceive women in the workforce as well, right? Perceptions of empowerment and all. Many scholars argue that globalization has been detrimental to women due to growing structural gender inequalities, but many respondents identify greater opportunities to challenge pre-existing patriarchal norms through the role models available in the globalized media. So both sides are there. Some is saying that it is detrimental, some is saying that it is beneficial. For what? Women empowerment in general. While there are increasing inequalities for households, women do not consider these to be gender disadvantages, emphasizing instead the opportunities for greater independence. So that means what? Some women, according to author, are basically saying that it is beneficial that globalization happened, right? Which of the following assumptions have been made? Globalization has increased incomes, resulting in a change in social life of the people. Which of the has increased incomes has been detrimental. Okay, there is no talk of income. So I don't know. Indian middle class has obtained the most benefits out of globalization. Most benefits. No, it's not like most benefits. We only know that they benefited. Most is extreme. The impact of globalization on women is not clear. That is true because both sides have been discussed. One side is saying that it is detrimental, another side is saying that opportunities have been provided, right? So both things are there. Okay, give it a try. Let's look at it. Robots increasingly operate among people and they now work alongside us in the factories, whereas okay, so this is the passage we also read, okay, but the question is different. So the passage is same, the question is different. Which one of the following best reflects the crux of the passage? Dependence of humans on robots is going to be the future of human society. I don't think we discussed the dependence on humans, the dependence of humans on robots. It was basically focused more on human behavior rather than human robot interaction. That's what we discussed, right? So I guess this I can definitely not infer. Implementation of robots in human society shall be done by ethical scientists. No. That's not what crux of the passage is. It is difficult to ascertain the future social context in the sphere of human machine interaction. Difficult to ascertain the future social context in the sphere of, no, it is not difficult. We are not even discussing what is the social context. With the increased use of robots for humans, the ethical dimension of their design and functionality should be given due consideration. This is definitely I can infer, because we discussed the roboticists should be ethical in the way they program the robots, right? So that's what we discussed. The wars of 21st century will be to capture, manipulate, or destroy others' data. Digital system powering organizations and nations around the world have become prime targets for attack, from individual criminals, well-organized cybercrime gangs, and state-sponsored hackers. As the internet becomes all-pervasive and the world gets increasingly interconnected, cyber attacks are bound to create a widespread impact. The WannaCry hacking attack in May 2017 that crippled computers across 150 countries is just an example of the pervasive nature of this problem. Billions of dollars are being wasted in the destruction, downtime, and replacement costs arising as a result of cyber insecurity. One statement best reflects the central idea of the passage. Global bodies should develop accountability mechanism for state sponsored. Now, we are discussing the threats of the cyber attacks, or how data is becoming crucial. That's the main idea. Cyber insecurity in the country causes major economic losses. This I can infer. To avoid the losses from cyber attacks, it is advised to regularly monitor the internet. No, we are not even discussing how to recover or how to prevent those attacks. We are not discussing that. Cyber insecurity is a global challenge. Therefore, nations should come together to develop solutions. This I can infer. The other part I cannot. This I cannot infer. So B, Bombay is the answer in this case. Okay. In India, policymakers have drawn on budgetary resources for providing support to low-income households for augmenting their consumption of selected goods and services, and also offering incentives to support selected categories of investors and producers. The economic objectives in these two categories are quite different. The first category would include the free or subsidized provision of food grains and services such as health and education. Examples of the latter group include the central government's recent initiative for production linked incentives to various sectors and tax concessions. Okay. In the past, incentives in the form of reduction of corporate taxes have been offered to promote investment in general or in certain regions as backward areas. Okay. So basically, what's happening regarding in reducing tax in order to increase incentives, in order to increase investments in the sectors that would eventually benefit the nation and the society. That's what we are discussing. Free or subsidized provision of food grains, and then health and education, right? The economic objectives of both the categories may be to uplift the poor out of the poverty line, could be to allure investors to investment, yes. The possibility of crony capitalism, no. These are the two benefits, so 1 and 2. Okay. All right. Present day health problems differ from those with which public health traditionally has been concerned in the amount of individual understanding necessary to prevent and cure diseases to avoid accidents. Okay. Present day health problems differ from those with which public health traditionally has been concerned. Okay. Avoiding disability and death from these causes depends on a great deal more on individual understanding and action than did the prevention of infectious diseases. Not every person needs to take specific preventive action to be protected from a communicable disease. For example, if a community, through the action of a few of its citizens and its government, installs a safe water supply and sanitary sewage disposal, all members of the community will benefit. The immunization of even a few persons in a community affords some protection to others. for each human person in a population reduces the chance of transmission of the disease, right? So we are discussing how on individual level it is important to be aware and to be mindful, right? Now, which one of the following best reflects the crux of the passage? Government should speed up vaccination for different diseases to prevent deaths. No, vaccination is not at all discussed. All citizens should take steps to reduce the load of disease from the community and prevent the spread of diseases. All? No. Author is saying even if some do it, most of the others get benefited as well. Individual knowledge about the infectious disease is important but not sufficient to protect community from its spread. I guess this is fine. Right? Just because one is doing it doesn't mean the whole community will benefit, right? Immunization of children is more important than adults as it reduces the chance of transmission of the. We are not discussing children versus adults here. So C is the best crux of the passage. All right, give it a try. Food, agriculture and fisheries depend on world's natural resources, so future food production will depend on how well these resources are conserved and used. Agriculture is impacted by urban land expansion and by higher water demand from other sectors. Development in coastal zones complicates fisheries governance in traditional fishing areas. The ocean ecosystem is affected by oil and gas exploration, marine shipping, and land based industries, whose pollution can lead to habitat loss and declining biodiversity. Agricultural risk hotspots occur where these resources pressures are most concentrated. The food, agriculture, and fisheries system is not only impacted by the environment but also by production techniques. The excessive use of nutrients in agriculture has been a major source of water pollution and is estimated to have reduced biodiversity in rivers, lakes, and wetlands by about 1/3 globally. Okay. Understood. Which one of the following statement best reflect the most critical inferences that can be drawn? Okay. So we are mostly discussing how these particular industries dependent on natural resources and how it could become complicated in the future. Sustainable environmental resource governance is the most crucial factor for food security in future. This I guess is too broad. Okay, but let me read others. Agricultural risk hotspots need to be identified and targeted efforts need to be made to bring about the danger. This actually is a specific detail only. This is only specific detail. This is not, you can infer from the whole passage, right? Biodiversity and food production depend not only on natural but also anthropogenic factors. I guess this is fine. Unsustainable practices in the food agriculture system threaten only biodiversity. Only biodiversity? No. So C and A. Sustainable environmental resource governance is the most crucial factor for the food security in future. And I'm not really sure whether this is the most or not. This is one of the crucial factor, but is it the most? I don't know. I'll go with the C. Okay. All right. The debate around how the matters of the mind are associated with the male and the body invariably linked to the women is not new. And of course, the mind is superior to the body. In this regard, the feminist critique of French philosopher René Descartes, Cartesian duality, is an important intervention. The mind-body dualism has led to gender inequality by privileging the rational mind over the irrational or emotional body. Women's voices have been suppressed and their silence has been treated as golden. What we need to understand and question is the politics behind recognizing the domain of intelligence as essentially a male prerogative. I'm sorry. Okay. Which of the following is the most rational or logical inference? Okay. Women should be treated equally with men, even in aspects of intellect. That can be inferred. That's why author is saying that what we need to understand and question is the politics. Descartes may be said to be responsible for gender inequality in society to some extent. You can infer that because it was him who came up with mind-body duality, And he said your body, if your body is emotional, your mind may be irrational, which is to say women's mind are irrational. So that's what he is indirectly proposing. So that you can say is indirectly responsible. Gender equality cannot be achieved without social change. I don't think we discussed any kind of that sorts here. So 1 and 2. All right. Let's try this. Permafrost wetlands, frozen carbon storing expanse of land in Europe and Western Siberia might be approaching their tipping point faster than expected, a new study warned. By 2040, Northern European might become too wet and want to support permafrost wetlands, and study published in Nature Climate Change added. Peatlands are a class of wetlands which are ecosystem flooded with water. Waterlogged conditions limit microbial decay of dead plant material rich in carbon dioxide. This prevents the reintroduction of the gas into the atmosphere. Peatlands, which occupy only 3% of the global land surface, store twice as much carbon as the world's forests, according to the United Nations Environment Program. Some peatlands are buried under frozen ground or permafrost and exist as permafrost peatlands. They are found in the northern parts of Alaska, Canada, Russia, and parts of northern Europe, the researchers said. Data on parts of Canada and Siberia is still lacking, study lead author Richard Fuster told Down to Earth. Frozen wetlands in Europe and Western Siberia store up to 39 billion tons of carbon. This is equivalent to twice that is held by the whole of European forest. Huge stocks of peat carbon have been protected for millennia by frozen conditions, but once those conditions become unsuitable, all that stored carbon can be lost very quickly. Study co-author Paul Morris, Associate Professor of Biogeoscience at Leeds, said. Which one of the following above passage about the peatlands? They are a type of water body. Yes, they flooded with water, right? Ice protects peatlands from degradation. I guess that is true. They are below the ice layer, right? That's what is mentioned. Where is that? Buried under frozen ground. That means buried under ice. So 1 and 2 both. Give it a try. While infrastructure is essentially for creating safe and inclusive places, we cannot underplay the importance of changing mindsets. There is a need for the sensitization of students, teachers, and staff in all educational institutions, from primary schools to universities, on understanding and accepting queer and transgender folks. India has taken a step in the right direction by enacting the Transgender Persons Act, which speaks of a trans-inclusive education system wherein transgender students learn with other students without fear of discrimination, neglect, or harassment. Perfect. Which one of the following statement best reflect the crux of the passage? Okay, so basically, need for reforms in the student education. That's what we are mostly talking about. With better ethos and proper implementation of the act, we can make a better world for transgender person, even with poor infrastructure. This is the problem I have. Author is saying that it is essential. You can't do it without that. Both infrastructure and comparison are the key to betterment of transgender person. This I can infer. With the help of said act, transgender folks can make themselves empowered. No, by just act, they can't be said to be empowered. India needs to be better sensitized about no, that's not the crux of the passage. The crux of the passage is B. It has to include infrastructure. It has to include transgender community, right? So B is the crux. With the weakening of democracy, corruption is also on the rise, working hand in hand, feeding on the weakened institutions and fundamentally unjust systems of power. Without effective protections, election can be central component in cycles of systematic corruption. This is increasingly true as even autocratic leaders use elections for some form of legitimacy for their rule. During elections, vote buying, bribery, and the abuse of state resources can be used in influence and coerce voters. To tackle the roots of political corruption and push back on the autocracy, democratic actors must confront opaque and illicit political funding and spending. From influence peddling to state capture, some have called illicit campaign finance the original sin of corruption because of the way it builds and bonds corrupt links between public and private sectors. I guess we read this passage before, but let's just look at the question. The question is different. What does the author mean by original sin in the above passage? So where was this original sin? Here. So let's read it. Some have called the illicit campaign finance the original sin of corruption because of the way it builds and bonds corrupt links between the public and private sector. So this is basically saying that this is the root cause. This is the root cause of the whole corruption. Normally, autocratic leaders use elections to gain legitimacy to their rule. No, that is not original sin. Political funding by private sector should be monitored by neutral agency. Should be monitored. We are talking about what is the original sin. This option is talking about an instruction. The issue of illegal campaign funding originally started with the concept of elections. No. Not the concept of elections, but the concept of illegal funding in the election. Illegal funding of political parties by the private sector in nation is the root cause of political corruption. I guess this is true. It has often been said that art is the reflection of society. That is what Hughes Micod, whatever, a famous French philosopher, was able to defend. Artists are not isolated creators. Their work is the result of their relationship with the outside world. Often commenting on the politics, powers, or wealth, artists may or may not dialogue with human concerns, which are themselves strongly conditioned by the culture in which we live. Non-Western works too, such as African or Oceanian masks and totems, derive from this pattern. In recent decades, the connections between art and society have become more obvious. For example, photography and video began to capture reality, documenting it, staging it, and sometimes denouncing it. Pop art artists have seized on our symbols, and a new generation of artists use their visibility to denounce, incentive, or invective, or educate the public. Okay, which one of the following statement best reflects the crux of the passage? Okay, so basically we are mainly discussing art, but we are also discussing how the society has to be evolved, or rather how art is basically evolving as the society grows, right? Non-Western societies should learn how to make the best use of art in understanding societies. Non-Western societies, we are, I guess, discussing only African and Oceanian masks. Non-Western works too, but they are also equally good, is what author is saying. So this doesn't make sense. Societies must invest in the promotion of arts for the propagation of their cultures. For the propagation of their cultures. I guess this is true, but this is not the crux of the passage, right? This is one specific details given in the passage. This doesn't make sense. Artists should always keep away the bias of their own culture to understand the society. No, it's not the crux. We're basically discussing how the society has to evolve, or how the art evolves in the society. That's what we are discussing. Just as a society grows, art evolves with time to reflect the realities of society. I guess this is perfect. Okay. The digital divide is associated with negative outcomes. It is suggested that the digital divide may cause technological, immaterial, social, and educational types of inequality. So basically, if you are divided digitally, you are divided technologically, materially, societal level, educationally, and so on. Individuals who lack access to information technology are disadvantaged in knowledge-based societies and economies. Further, e-government is an important means to break barriers and bring government assistance to all citizens. Digital media usage is a strong predictor of political processes, in which implies that a digital divide may result in political alienation of those who lack digital media access. So basically, How digital media access has gained prominence over the years is what we are discussing. Which of the following are the assumptions? Building cyber cafes could help reduce digital divide. Where does it come from? I don't know. Bridging the digital divide could help empower citizens technologically as well as politically. That is true. So 2 is your answer in this case. Okay. So, since ancient times in India, Mother Earth has been considered a divine entity and her worship is an integral part of the country's civilizational ethos. One can find numerous reverential references to Mother Earth in the Vedas. In tune with this divine knowledge, Indian farmers since ancient times have followed sustainable and holistic agricultural practices. With changing times and a growing population, agriculturists adopted modern scientific techniques. Extensive use of fertilizers and pesticides led to the deterioration of soil health and contamination of water bodies and the food chain, which posed serious health risks to people and livestock. Okay, so basically, how earth is considered sacred in Indian ethos, and what happens when you don't do it so, right? What has led to the food chain contamination? Increasing demand for food by growing population, that is discussed, right? With changing time and growing population. Judicious use of fertilizers. Extensive use of fertilizers has caused. Judicious use means proper use. That has not caused the food chain contamination. It's the excessive use that has caused the contamination. So I guess one only. Okay. Let's go to next. Education is most valuable for gaining learning and wisdom. Though books are essential to education, the notion encompasses more than just books and bookish knowledge. It isn't required for education to be only based on books. The most important goal of education is to help people with how to read and write. The first step towards literacy is reading and writing. Education provides a person with endless opportunities for growth and advancement. People who have had an education tend to be calmer and more self assured. People who have been educated are disciplined and understand the importance of time. Education allows a person to be more expensive and opinionated, is able to readily communicate his viewpoints, which are supported by a clear aim and rationale. Education benefits not only individual but also the community. The most important aspect of education that it goes from one individual to another, then throughout society and eventually throughout the country. An educated individual tries to teach and inspire everyone with whom he or she comes into contact. Education brings one up to speed on the technological advancement as well. A well educated person can easily adjust to technological developments. Education, more than anything else, is a source of hope, the desire for a better life, the desire for a wealthy and poverty free existence, right? So, again, we had read this passage, I guess, earlier, but the question was different. So, let's kind of look at this. Without the following statement best reflect the crux of the passage. Education is a necessary condition for economic growth of a person. That is not the crux of the passage. The crux of the passage is basically how education helps, and these are the benefits. From line 3 to the last, he is discussing benefits of the education. So it has to have a education benefit in the option. A person cannot be successful in life without education. No, we don't know what happens when you don't have education. That is not discussed. We only know if you are educated, what all benefits you get. An educated society is essential for poverty free existence. Again, I am not really sure, just because everyone is educated, does it mean everyone will be poverty free? Not discussed. A well educated individual is a valuable asset to the society. This is true. This has been discussed. So D is the answer in this case. Okay. You are what you eat, and similarly, you are what you think, and you are totally what you want to believe. Such is the power of our minds. Such is the power of our minds on who we are, what we do, how we behave, what choices we make, how we conduct ourselves, what mood we choose to be in and be consumed by, and how we allow others to see us, accept us, define us, and celebrate or shun us. Okay. According to the author, which one of the following option best explain who you are? A person's willpower? No. What we believe? What you want to believe? So this can be true. How we behave? Do we have anything about behavior? How we behave? On who we are, what we do, how we behave. You are what you eat. Similarly, you are what you think, and you are totally what you want to believe. Okay. You are totally what you want to believe. Who you are. You are totally what we believe. So I guess B. C and D are true, but they are narrow. Right? This is appropriate. If you walk down the road, you will see the splendor of nature, the extraordinary beauty of the green fields and the open skies, and you will hear the laughter of children. But in spite of all that, there is a sense of sorrow. There is the anguish of a woman bearing a child. There is a sorrow in death. There is a sorrow when you are looking forward to something and it does not happen. There is sorrow when a nation runs down, goes to seed, and there is the sorrow of corruption, not only in the collective but also in the individual. There is sorrow in your own house if you look deeply, the sorrow of not being able to fulfill, the sorrow of your own pettiness or incapacity, and various unconscious sorrows. So many sorrows that the author has discussed. There is also laughter in life. Laughter is lovely. So now we are discussing laughter. So laughter is a lovely thing, to laugh without reason, to have joy in one's heart without cause, to love without seeking anything in return. But such laughter rarely happens to us. Based on the passage given above, the following assumptions have been made. The more you laugh, the more you leave sorrow behind. No. He is saying that, okay, he is saying that you laugh doesn't mean that you leave the sorrow behind. He is saying sometimes there is also laughter in life. So sometimes you have a sorrow in life, sometimes you have a laughter in life. Author is not saying that laughter is the medicine for the sorrow. That is not what is discussed here. So I don't think the more you leave sorrow behind. No. There is beauty around us only if we open our eyes to it. I guess this is where discussed it. The extraordinary beauty of the green fields and the open skies, and you will hear the laughter of children. But in spite of all that, there is sense of sorrow. Yeah, there is a beauty around you if you see it. So that's true. Laughter is without reason, but every sorrow has a reason. No. Laughter can be without reason. To laugh without reason, to have joy in one's heart. This is taking it literally, that you definitely laugh without reason, right? So 2 only is my answer. Okay. Go ahead, pause the video, give it a try. All right. Plants could be selective bred for certain qualities. In 1866, Gregor Mendel's studies in heredity were published in Austria. In experiments with pea plants, Mendel learned how traits were passed from one generation to the next. His work paved way for improving crops through genetics. New crop rotation methods also evolved during this time. Many of these were adopted over the next century or so throughout Europe. For example, the Norfolk four-field system developed in England proved quite successful. It involved the yearly rotation of several crops, including wheat, turnips, barley, clover, and ryegrass. This added nutrients to the soil, enabling farmers to grow enough to sell some of their harvest without having to leave any land unplanted. Most of the world was not affected by these developments. However, farmers in Asia, Australia, Africa, and South America continued to use old way of agriculture. Okay. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Okay, and which of the following assumptions are valid? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, the Europeans introduced plants such as potatoes, tomatoes, corn, and tobacco in Asia. Can you say that? Most of the world was not affected by these developments. However, farmers in Asia, Australia, Africa continued to use old ways. Where did we discuss potatoes, tomatoes, corn, and tobacco? By channeling water from streams into their fields, the farmers were able to increase the food grain production in Europe. Where is that water thing? New agricultural methods have helped in increasing the soil fertility and production. So 3 only, I guess. I guess 1 and 2 are not discussed at all. Our world and our region face the most serious strategic confluence of events since the end of the Second World War. Intensifying strategic and geo-economic competition, the return of war to Europe, growing climate risks, and enduring pandemic impacts, all of which are driving inflation, labor scarcity, and supply chain shocks. Countries which share common values and interests must work together with resolve to shape our economic and strategic environment so that it continues to support our collective security and prosperity. According to the passage, what is the outcome of events mentioned? Higher prices of essential, intensifying in the return of war, growing climate risk, and enduring impacts, all of is driving inflation. So that means higher price of essential. Unavailability of raw materials, that means supply chain shocks. Manpower shortages, that means labor scarcity. So all 3 are there. 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. This is the. So I guess we saw this passage before, right? This is about how percentage of women in the workforce eventually determines how good you are how it eventually helps in the economic development, right? So I guess that was this passage. So let's look at the question. What is the most logical and rational inference that can be drawn? India should make provision of longer maternity leave, creche facilities, and equal remuneration. I guess we did not discuss maternity leave and all. India cannot harness the demographic demand till the working age rural populace finds remunerative employment. I don't think we're talking about rural workforce. We are talking more of a woman in the workforce. Okay. All countries with high levels of female labor participations have comparatively high levels of political representation of women. We don't know whether they have high levels of political representation. We know that they are economically developed, right? So C is a little distortion. India is facing new low political representation of women due to both social and economic factors. I guess that is mentioned in this last paragraph. You can infer that from there. Okay. Various factors help people in believing that people from different countries hold different values. Such factors are cognitive, social learning, stereotyping processes may lead us to encode other groups' character in ways that magnify the differences between the groups. More relevant, however, is the nature of the concept of the value itself. Specifically, as abstract ideas, value subsumes a wide range of behaviors as examples of concepts. People may perceive differences between social groups because of the differences between groups in the specific behaviors that are seen exemplars of the different values, even if other behaviors that are examples of the values do not differ. So if you remember the discussion that we had, you can have a set of values and it can drive behavior 1 or it can drive a behavior 2. Now these two will be a lot different, right? But they essentially are derived from the same values, right? So that was the whole crux of the passage, if you remember. Now, based on the passage above, the following assumptions have been made. The value of gender equality should be universal and independent of societies. Values influence behavior and vice versa. No. Values influence behavior. Behaviors don't influence values. The value of gender equality should be universal and independent of societies. The value of equality may be linked to comparisons between men and women in countries where gender equality is promoted, but not in countries where gender is not the part of political agenda. The value of gender equality should be universal and independent of societies. No, there are two countries that author has discussed. Both the countries have gender equality as values. Equality as a value, but one country has different notion of gender equality, another country has different notion of gender equality. So both, neither one and two. Okay. With an interconnected world, we might assume that today's children have higher EQ as compared to their predecessors, but the truth might be different. With the boom in technology, many children are glued to their screens and don't get to meet other children face to face. Relating to others and relationship management is an important element that nurtures a high EQ in an individual, but technology and its addiction among children are a hindrance in attaining high EQ levels, and this leads to many of them not being able to manage their emotions well. Okay, so we are basically discussing how it was assumed that because people are connected, children will develop EQ, but it's actually not. Children are not doing, I mean, it's unable to, because of too much, they are glued too much to the phone, the relations, there's very less face-to-face interaction, right? Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Technology directly impacts the EQ of children. That definitely is true. Technology and its addiction among children are hindrance. So that is true. Human relations have a positive impact on EQ as compared to technology. That is also true. He said that because you are having less face-to-face interaction, you are not developing the EQ as used to be earlier. So 1 and 2 both have to be there. So C is my answer in this case. Okay. All right. So let's look at it now. It says Minister Narendra Modi declared at the COP26 summit, by 2030, India would ensure that 50% of its energy will be from renewable energy sources. However, none of this can help the 1.5 degree Celsius mark being breached. So none of this can help. So this mark has already been breached. A major point of emphasis of the report, particularly of South Asia, is the trend in the wet bulb temperature, an index of the impact of heat and humidity combined and its effect on health. Lucknow and Patna, according to one of the several studies cited in the report, were among the cities predicted to reach wet bulb temperatures of 35 degrees if emissions continued to rise, while Bhubaneswar, Chennai, Mumbai, Indore and Ahmedabad are at a risk of reaching wet bulb temperature of 32 to 34 degrees. Okay, with continued emissions. This will have consequences such as a rise in heat wave linked deaths or reduced productivity. Global sea level will likely rise 44 to 76 centimeters this century if governments meet their current emission cutting pledges. But with higher emissions and if the ice sheets collapse more quickly than expected, sea levels could rise as much as 2 meters this century and 5 meters by 2150. 2 meters, like that's a huge, from 44 centimeter to 2 meter. That's like almost 5 times. India is one of the most vulnerable countries in terms of the population that will be affected by sea level rise. By the middle of the century, around 35 million of its people could face annual coastal flooding, with 45 million to 50 million at risk by the end of the century if emissions are high. Experience has shown that partisans' economic calculations trump climate considerations, but India must shore up its adaptation measures and urgently move to secure the futures of its many vulnerable who have most to lose. So we are basically discussing that how dangerous the situation could be if countries don't follow the target that they have, even if they follow the target, we are looking at 44 to 76 centimeter rise in the sea level. That directly or indirectly is going to hit 35 million of the people. Usually, climate considerations are kind of ignored in terms of economic calculations or considerations. But the author urges that India must look at it at the utmost priority. Okay. Now, let's look at the answers. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Okay. India alone achieving net zero emission is meaningless as developed countries are major carbon emitters. Actually, India is one of the biggest contributors. So, if India achieves net zero emissions, it would be very highly meaningful. So, it's not meaningless at all. Climate change in India will induce lesser precipitation. Will induce lesser precipitation. I don't think we have said that. Lucknow and Patna. So I don't think we discussed that. I'm sorry. In the current scenario, India alone cannot mitigate the negative impact of climate change. That is true. That I can assume. So I guess 3 is the answer I will mark. Okay. Next question, give it a try. New data and analysis in the report New Threats to Human Security in the Anthropocene shows that people's sense of safety and security is at a low in almost every country, including the richest countries, despite years of upwards development success. Those benefiting from some of the highest levels of good health, wealth, education outcomes are reporting even greater anxiety than 10 years ago. To tackle this disconnect between development and perceived security, the report calls for greater solidarity across borders and a new approach to development, one that allows people to live free from want, fear, anxiety, and indignity. The imperative to act now has never been more clear as new findings also show that global life expectancy at birth is falling for a second year because of COVID-19, and overall human development measures are also moving downward. So basically, author is discussing the impact, right? Furthermore, climate change is likely to become a leading cause of death around the world. Even with moderate mitigation of emissions, some 40 million people might die because of changes in the temperatures before the end of the century. The report examines a cluster of threats that have shifted to become more prominent in recent years, including those from digital technologies, inequalities, conflicts, and the ability of healthcare system to tackle new challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So it's basically discussing climate change, its adverse effects, and add to that what you call it, the events of COVID-19 and all. We are basically becoming worse from the bad, right? Which one of the following are most rational inferences that can be drawn? Okay, the sense of security is low in almost every country. I guess that is there at a low in almost every country, so I can definitely infer that. The climate change will cause most number of deaths globally by the end of the century. Most globally or in India? I guess that was in India. So where is, furthermore, the climate change is likely to become a leading cause. Okay, will cause most, and this is the leading cause. So it's not India, but again, it will cause most number and it will be leading cause of death. There's a difference, right? Most number of deaths might still be happening because of other reasons, but one of the leading causes would be climate change. So I guess most is a little extreme here. So I'll mark A as the answer in this case. Okay. All right. Go ahead, pause the video, give it a try. Okay. For most people, the climate crisis is no longer a future scenario. Floods, heat waves, wildfires have gripped our entire planet and will become stronger in years to come. Countries in the global south are particularly hard hit, even though their citizens have been emitting the least CO2. Drastic reduction of carbon emissions is only one pillar in the fight against climate change. Many of its consequences can no longer be stopped. There is an urgent need for adaptation measures so people both in cities and in rural areas have the chance to cope with the effects of climate change. That's why several years ago, rich nations committed to supporting low income countries with $100 billion or 95 billion, I don't know, euros annually from 2020 to help them cut emissions and adapt to climate change. It was a central promise for more climate justice that has not been kept so far. Okay. So it's no longer a future crisis, and now people, rich nations committed to supporting low income. So this is a good move that author is basically trying to say. Okay? That you are fulfilling the promise that wasn't kept before. So it's a good thing that author is trying to say. What is the crucial message conveyed by the above passage? So it's basically to say what is the conclusion or what is the main idea of the passage, right? Controlling carbon emissions should be the prime focus in the fight against climate change. If that is the case, then why would author discuss this funding and all, right? So this doesn't make sense. The rich countries must be made accountable to low income countries facing the climate change. Must be made accountable. No, they are being accountable. They should be accountable. It's not what author's opinion is. Author is rather commending the effort that the rich nations are putting in. Climate change not only affects the environment but also threatens the very existence of human life. Again, if that is the main idea of the passage, where would this rich nation in supporting low income nation and all will come? Climate change cannot be reversed. The only solution is adaptation mechanisms. I guess this is all encompassing. This includes everything, right? So countries in the are particularly against climate change, a strict reduction of carbon emissions, many of its consequences. So everything, adaptation measures, so people both in cities have chance to cope. So it encompasses everything. So I guess this option makes more sense, right? Okay. Give it a try. All right. In recent years, the significant rise of private cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ether has spooked central banks throughout the world and pushed the case for official digital currencies. A 2021 BIS survey of central banks found that 86% were actively researching the potential for such currencies. 60% were experimenting with the technology, and 14% were deploying the pilot projects. China, having already engaged in pilot project for its digital RMB, is planning a major rollout soon. There has been little doubt, therefore, that India needs a digital rupee. The important questions are about the details and the timeline. Okay, so it's quite a recent phenomenon, and if you are up to the news, India has actually made the announcement to launch the central CBDC, central bank digital currency, right? All right. So which of the following assumptions have been made? Valid assumptions. Okay. India needs to launch digital rupee to curb the negative impact of private cryptocurrencies. Author is kind of suggesting that, because author says that look what China did, but author is also saying that be more cautious, right? The details and the timeline is what matters. But yes, author is kind of suggesting that India needs to launch a digital rupee, so that I can refer, right? The technology behind cryptocurrency is no longer monopolized by private entities. I can infer that because China has come up with something There are has spooked the central banks throughout. Right, pilot projects. A lot of them were deploying pilot projects. That means what? Most of them are already into it, so it's not monopolized anymore. India needs to launch the digital currency soon to compete against the Chinese digital currency. Not to compete against Chinese digital currency. That's not the aim. To do it for the benefits of it. India needs to launch for the benefits that it provides, not to compete against China, right? That's not the purpose to launch the digital currency. So 1 and 2 makes sense. C. Okay. All right. All right. Scholars of education have traditionally made a distinction between achievement tests and proficiency tests. The former focus on what has been taught according to a prescribed syllabus, while the latter focus on what has actually been acquired in the domain of knowledge through classroom transactions. The achievement test scores normally indicate the extent to which the learner has mastered the prescribed textbooks. Even after she has passed the class 12 examination with distinction, a student may not be equipped to critically examine the climate made by a scholar, claims made by a scholar, propose alternative hypothesis, and initiate a new line of rational inquiry. Okay. So it may not be critically equipped, right? The scholars have traditionally made a distinction between achievement tests and proficiency tests. Okay. Which one of the following statement best reflect the most logical and rational suggestion implied by the passage? It is not possible to focus on proficiency tests because of the subjectivity involved therein. Can I infer that? The former focus on what has been taught according to while the latter acquired in the domain of knowledge through classroom, the achievement test scores mastered the described test even after it has so okay, this is subjectivity involved. That's what author is saying. Even if someone has scored distinction in class 12, may basically struggle in the proficiency test. What is proficiency test? Basically propose alternative hypothesis, initiate a new line of inquiry. That, according to author, will a student who is good at achievement test will face a problem during the proficiency test, right? So I guess A is fine. Critical thinking and not rational inquiry makes a student more intelligent. We are not discussing what makes more intelligent. Author is simply suggesting that you have achievement test, you have proficiency test. You know the results of achievement test because there are mechanisms for that. But someone who is good at achievement tests doesn't necessarily mean is good at proficiency test as well. So that's what the author is trying to say. The knowledge acquired through prescribed textbook is not enough to deal with claims made by the scholars. Is not enough. This is the most logical and practical suggestion. So is this a suggestion? Although this is true, to deal with the claims made by the scholars, definitely, not only do you need knowledge, but you also need knowledge of how to put forth it. Propose alternate hypothesis, initiate a new line of rational inquiry. All of this will require not only knowledge, but skills beyond that. So I guess this is kind of, I kind of agree with this, but where is the practical suggestion in it? This is just a piece of information. Where is suggestion? So I don't think. The criteria for academic outcome must be acknowledged and critical thinking rather than good grades. Academic outcomes. Author is not asking to change the way academic works, right? Author is simply saying what you do there doesn't necessarily help you in the real world. Okay, so this is kind of a tricky question, but I guess you can safely mark A as the answer and eliminate the others. Okay. All right, let's move to the next one. The idea of initiating cultural exchanges programs was first hatched after the Second World War, when the people of different countries, wanted to unify against violence and hate among nations. The concept is essentially a process that involves a two-way transfer of an individual to a different country from their home country to promote their home country's values and culture and imbibe the visiting country's traditions and way of life. Okay, so that's the cultural exchange programs. Basically, you go to some country, understand their ways, and you also tell your ways or your culture there. Invite the guests from other countries to your country, you tell them your traditions, you learn from them at the same time, right? So that is the culture exchange program. It is a method of improving relations amongst nations wherein they can respect and understand the needs and values of other nations in the world, which increases the probability of desired relations of trade and commerce, as well as political relations due to the attraction that this concept garners. Okay. Which one of the following statement best reflects the central idea of the passage? Cultural exchanges can contribute to the development of a peaceful unilateral world. Unilateral, peaceful world. These are two extreme words. We are only discussing two countries who want to better their understanding of each other. That's when you do cultural exchange, right? Peaceful and unilateral world, it's like it's going to extreme. Cultural exchanges became a necessity for developing nations due to their developmental needs? No. Where are we talking about this being a necessity? If you want to do it, you do it. If you don't want to do it, you leave it. There's no necessity. Cultural exchange programs help in the wholesome development of an individual and strengthen the international relations between countries. I guess this I can infer. In the post-Second World War period, cultural diplomacy gained significance to solve the existing disputes between the nations. Best reflect the central idea of the passage. We are discussing the benefits of culture exchange. That is given in C, not in D. Right? So C is my answer in this case. Okay. Go ahead, pause the video, try this one. All right. One of the biggest problems that solar energy technology poses is that energy is only generated while the sun is shining. That means nighttime and overcast days can interrupt the supply. The shortage created by this interruption would not be a problem if there were low cost ways of storing energy, as extremely sunny periods can generate excess capacity. As the global capacity for solar power continues to rise, nations like Japan and other global leaders in solar energy technology are focusing on developing adequate energy storage to deal with this issue. This is a well-known issue, right? You can generate as much electricity as you can on your roof, right? But where will you store it? That's the problem. In the daytime, okay, you can use it real time. But what about the night time? You have to store the energy so as to be able to use it at the night time, right? And that's where most of the focus is, according to the author, right? Rational and logical inferences that can be drawn. Okay. Tropical countries with year-long availability of sunshine are less dependent on the storage of solar energy. We are not discussing who is dependent and who is not dependent. We are not discussing comparison within the countries. Gone. In future, the cost of storage of solar energy may reduce due to the involvement of global leaders. That you can infer, because a lot of global leaders are working on it. That means what? Chances are you might see cheaper options in future in order to store energy. So 2 only is my answer in that case. Okay. All right. So go ahead, give it a try. Let's see. The impact of climate change is much more evident in Indian culture, where around 85% of farmers are small and marginal, and 60% of agriculture is dependent upon the vagaries of the monsoon. The role of irrigation therefore takes the front seat, The continued irrigation through traditional practices since the introduction of the Green Revolution in the 60s, however, has begun to show its multitudinous ill effects on groundwater quality and height, water logging, soil salinity, soil health, crop productivity, partial factor productivity, and cost economics of farm practices. This is where micro irrigation assumes significance. So I guess this is one of the previous year question. I guess I have solved this before, but anyway, which of the following best represents the crux of the passage? So you understand it's an easy read. You understand this, right? Micro irrigation has the potential to address all the ill effects of the green revolution and reduce the dependence on monsoon. I guess this is true. I am only worried about to address the ill effects. Okay, I read it as all effects, so all would have make it extreme. It talks about ill effects, so I guess this is true. Climate change has reduced the overall productivity of Indian agriculture. No, not, and that's not the crux of the passage, right? The crux of the passage is it has to include micro irrigation in it, because that's where the author is concluding, and that's where author is giving his argument that look, there is a technique that can be beneficial in all the effects or ill effects that you are facing earlier, right? Second green revolution presents a viable solution to deal with the impacts of climate change on agriculture. No, there is no micro irrigation here. The government should invest more in micro irrigation for its large scale adoption. No, that's not the crux of the passage. Crux of the passage is how micro irrigation is beneficial than all the other existing techniques that we have today, right? So A is the answer in that case. All right, give it a try. So children growing up in most disadvantaged neighborhoods, meaning those with poor housing quality, more poverty, lower levels of employment, education. So children growing up in more disadvantaged neighborhoods show observable increase in brain activity when viewing emotional faces on a screen. Okay, but importantly, this association was true only when the adults in those neighborhoods also did not have strong shared norms about preventing crime and violence. The findings emphasize that where children live, the resources of others in the neighborhood may affect brain development, but neighbors may help protect children from these effects on the brain when they can build positive social norms about looking out for one another and preventing violence. Okay. Which one of the following are the most rational and logical inferences? There is a visible impact of adult behavior on the brain of children. Yes, that is the reason why author is suggesting that neighbors can build a healthy community and build that environment where children will not have to, or their brains will not get affected as much. Imparting positive values in children through socialization is not the sole responsibility of the family. That is also true, because author says it's the neighbor's job. He particularly used the word neighbors, right? So this is also true. So both 1 and 2. Okay. Go ahead, give it a try. All right. While the Keynesian theories usually propagate substantial government spending in types of crisis to kickstart consumption, Hayek's work theorizes that extreme hand-holding by the government leads to long-term stagnation due to interference in natural market forces. Okay. The Keynesian theories use substantial government spending in types of crisis to kickstart consumption. It's like in the COVID times, government started spending more on people so that people can start buying more things. Demand increases, production increases, basically economy gets back on track, right? But what happens because of that? People have more money, demand rises, inflation rises, and that is the reason why you have so many quarters of high inflation in last couple of years, especially after COVID. And that is also the reason why interest rates have been hiking, because in order to counter the inflation, you have to increase the interest rates so that loans become cheaper and people start taking lesser loans. That's usually the idea, but that's a little bit of digression, but let's get back. So Hayek's works theorizes that Extreme hand holding by the government leads to long-term stagnation due to interference in natural market forces. Okay, most nations went with Keynes' approach of vigorous government intervention by huge spending in form of cash handouts and putting money in people's pockets. They hoped that such measures would awaken demand and lift the spirit of businesses who would then hire more people. In retrospect, it is this thought which seemed to be a total miscalculated step, since artificially stimulating the economy on such a micro scale inevitably leads to inflation followed by a slowdown. This is classic case of what happened during COVID and what is happening after that. Okay. So according to the passage, why did Keynesian's approach to handle crisis fail? Because it backfired. It kind of, they wanted more money in the hands of the people so that demand would rise, but it actually gave rise to the inflation, which induced the slowdown. That's why it failed. It requires huge government spending, but governments didn't have the financial resources to spend. No, governments did spend. That happened. It requires the government should print money in huge amounts, but that leads to inflation economy, ultimately hurting demand. Up till here it was fine, but ultimately hurting demand? No, demand actually increases. The government transferred money to businesses to hire people now. It fails because it causes prolonged interference in natural market forces, which ultimately leads to a slowdown. That is definitely the answer, right? So we are in the last 5 questions. So we'll look at the last 5 questions in this video. Okay. Go ahead, give this one a try. Pause the video, give it a try. All right. A history of clothing can do several things. It will introduce students to thinking more about what does dress codes and opposition to them have done in the past and what they signify. Okay. For one, dress codes symbolized and affirmed power structures, whether these were colonial, upper caste, religious, or patriarchal power structures. By using their power and even violence, states, religious authorities, upper caste, or even male heads of families could insist that people conform to prescribed ways of dressing. Societal hierarchies were thus sustained and perpetuated. Okay. Which one of the following are the most rational and logical inferences that can be made? So author is basically saying, learn about dress codes. It has a lot of history behind that. Okay. Knowledge about the history of clothing makes a student understand society in a meaningful manner. I guess that is what author is trying to do. He is basically trying to say, look at the dress codes and what was the clothing style before. You would understand how the society worked, right? So this is true. Knowledge about the history of clothing will help in building greater civility and respect for differences. Will help building greater civility? No. It will help you understand the society better. It won't help you make society better. Okay, it will just help you understand better. So true is not the case. By controlling clothing in society, the state control the power structures in society. That is true. That's what author is saying. You have to understand that in order to understand the society back then, right? So 1 and 3 both make sense here. Okay. All right. Go ahead, pause the video, give it a try. All right. In sum, the main aim of transport planning is to make the transport sector more sustainable from a social and environmental point of view, while simultaneously allowing tourism to grow. Okay. Transport planning and tourism policy have to be integrated to achieve joint environmental and social objectives. In this sense, it is important to create incentives that reduce the need for private cars and minimize the length of time needed to access specific locations. This could lead to substantial welfare gains in terms of pollution reduction and improved access for rural inhabitants. So author is trying to say, at least for the cause of environment, the transport and the tourism must come together and devise the ways of reaching to a particular location in a better manner with less number of cars and more public transport and something like that. Okay. What is the crucial message conveyed by the above passage? Separating the transport and tourism policy will be detrimental to the society and environment. That you can infer because that's what author is trying to say. You come together, sit across the table, decide what is it that you will do. That will ensure that environment is less harmed, right? So A is fine. Tourism industry cannot grow without the growth in the transport sector. No. Author is saying like individually, I don't know what you will do, but together if you come, maybe environment may get benefited. Pollution and economic issues of rural inhabitants exist because of poor public transport infrastructure. No, that is not the crucial message of the author. Social environmental development is dependent on the synergy between transport and tourism. This is too broad. It's saying socio environmental development depends only on that, and there are no other factors. This is too broad. Okay, so A is the answer in this case. All right, go ahead, pause the video, give it a try. All right. Today, about 25% of modern pharmacopoeia are derived from the plants. WHO estimated that about 80% of the developing countries' population still relies on traditional medicines, mostly plant drugs, to help meet their healthcare needs. Also, there is an increase in the demand for plant products in both developing and developed countries because of several advantages such as no side effects, non-toxic, and affordable prices. Plants provide the raw material for industries producing pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, perfumes, and fragrance flavors, imparting biochemical. Therefore, there is an urgent need for conservation, sustainable utilization, and management of plant genetic resources of the region to meet the growing requirements of food, fodder, fiber, health, water, and other needs. So the passage starts about discussing the local medicines or traditional medicines. Also, there is an increase of our plant-based products. Plant also provide raw material for all of this. Therefore, there is an urgent need for conservation. So that's what author is saying. Because you use it so extensively in all these many domains, now is the time you start conserving it. Something like that, right? Developed nations are mainly dependent on chemical-based medicines. Can I infer that? Estimated 80% of the developing countries' population still relies on traditional medicines. So can I say developed demand for developing countries because of several others such as no side effects in the demand. Okay, there is an increase in demands for plant products in both developing and developed. So you can kind of infer that currently developed nations are mainly dependent on non-plant based medicines. I don't know whether non-plant based is equal to chemical or not. So, but for the sake of this argument, I'll just mark this as true. Many plant genetic resources are getting extinct because of the increasing loss of biodiversity. Many plant genetic resources are getting extinct. Are we talking about extinctions? We are not talking about extinctions, right? Extinctions is not the reason why you should preserve. According to this author, because we use it extensively, that's why you should conserve. Not because they are going extinct, that's why you should conserve, right? So one only is what I would mark here. Okay. All right. Last two questions. Give it a try. Pause the video, give it a try, and let me know. All right. A healthy mind forms the nucleus of harmonious community. Yoga can not only help us improve our mental health, but also help us become karma yogis. A community of karma yogis is one where every member performs his or her duty while maintaining equanimity under all circumstances. Yoga can also spark creativity, which can in turn enhance one's self-esteem, belief in oneself, and improve focus. A community of karma yogis could therefore help the world become a more peaceful place. In a sense, therefore, yoga has the potential to spark a revolution that lifts us out of our miseries. What does the author mean by community of karma yogis? when all members maintain a calm and composed attitude even under stressful situation. Okay, this could be true. People living in harmony with nature in order to ensure a sustainable lifestyle. With nature, that is not discussed. With each other, that is what is discussed. A group of people maintaining the integrity at workplace, not only at workplace but everywhere. A community of people upholding rule of law while discharging one's responsibility. Upholding the rule of law. Is there a rule of law? It's more of a duty. It's not a law. You perform your duties. It's not like someone will punish you if you don't do that. That's what law is. But this is, we are talking about duties. Okay, so I guess A makes sense. Okay. All right. Last question for this video. Give it a try and let me know your answer. All right. While infrastructure is essential for creating safe and inclusive places, we cannot underplay the importance of changing mindsets. There is a need for the sensitization of students, teachers, and staff in all educational institutions from primary school to universities on understanding and accepting queer and transgender folks. India has taken a step in the right direction by enacting the Transgender Person Act, which speaks of a trans-inclusive education system wherein transgender students learn with other students without fear of discrimination, neglect, or harassment. I guess we saw this passage before also, but the question is different, so let's look at that. Which of the following assumptions valid? Okay. Presently, every stakeholder in educational institution is not adequately sensitized about the transgender persons. So this is true. That is why author is saying you need to sensitize your student, teacher, staff. If author is saying that, that means what? There are some people who have not been sensitized. So A is there. Before the enactment of Transgender Person Act, there was no any act in the country to deal with transgender person. We don't know whether there was act there before or not. We only know that after that act, at least there is some awareness. So 2 is not true. I don't know what happened before, right? The said act will empower the transgender while removing difficulties they face in every sector. The act by itself will not empower. The act plus the awareness and the acceptance, that will empower, right? So that's what is discussed. Trans-inclusive education system, taken step by enacting the you need education system like that, where students learn with other students without fear of discrimination, neglect, harassment. So not only law, but law plus some action over it. That's what will empower, right? So again, 3 is not. So 1 only is what I would mark in this case. Okay. So I have this around 150 questions in this. So 75 of them we have solved. Yes, I guess 75 is what we solved today. So I will give this document to you. You can solve the rest of the 75 questions in case you want to practice. I guess once you go through this video and in case if it's possible, you try the rest of the 75 questions. I don't think you don't have to do anything else. Just write 1 or 2 mocks if possible, and that should be it. Also, in case if you are gonna solve the rest of the 75 questions, do let me know in the comment if you want a video on those questions. I would be more than happy to upload the video solutions for them as well. All right, so that was quite a long video. I guess it would be beneficial for you. So that's it from my side. Do like, share, and subscribe the video. And we'll meet you in the next video where we are going to look at the basics of maths. And similar to English, I'm going to be solving the maths questions as well. So see you in the next video. Have a happy studying. Thank you.